Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. There was an old wooden house on a quiet hill, left to rot for decades. At night, its windows moved a little even though the air stayed still. Inside, low voices hummed strange tunes I could not understand. Long shadows stretched across the walls, and they seemed to watch anyone who came near, always holding back, never getting close enough to see clearly. No one visited that place, no one talked about it, but I went there anyway. I reached the hill around midnight. I had parked my car down the slope near a dirt road with overgrown bushes. There was no wind, no traffic sounds, no lights except a weak moon. I could see the house at the top, a simple structure made of old planks. The wood looked dry and uneven. Some parts of the frame looked crooked. The roof sagged a bit. I stood at the bottom of the hill for a while, breathing quietly. My hands were sweaty. I smelled damp earth and some kind of moldy scent drifting down. It stuck in my nose. My throat felt tight. I decided to move up. The grass on the slope reached almost to my knees. It felt rough against my jeans. Every step made a soft rustling noise. In the dark, I could barely make out the path. I carried a flashlight, but I kept it off for now. I wanted to keep quiet and listen. I didn't hear anything except my own footsteps and my breathing. After a few minutes, I reached flatter ground. The house stood about 20 feet ahead. Its shape looked solid enough, but I knew it had not been maintained for a long time. I turned on my flashlight. The beam showed peeling paint, loose boards, a few missing shingles. The windows were all closed, yet I had read old stories saying they rattled at night by themselves. I swallowed hard. I touched the front door. The wood felt rough and cold. I tried the handle. It turned with some effort, and the door opened into a small front room. Dust floated in the flashlight's beam. The air inside smelled like old fabric left in a damp closet. My nose twitched. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The main room looked small and empty. A broken chair leaned against a wall. There was a narrow staircase going up. The walls had patches of mold near the corners. Something made me scratch at my neck. My skin felt prickly. I wanted to stay calm, so I took slow breaths. I kept shining the flashlight around. I saw a narrow doorway leading to what might have been a kitchen. There was a sink, a table with one leg broken, and a pile of leaves and twigs in one corner. It looked like some animal had dragged them in. I waited and listened. At first, nothing. Then I thought I heard a voice, like someone humming with their mouth closed. It lasted a few seconds and then stopped. I tried to figure out where it came from. Maybe upstairs. I raised my flashlight and tried to steady my hand. I noticed I was breathing faster. My chest felt tight. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small. There was no response, just silence. I moved back into the main room and walked toward the stairs. The steps looked weak, with thin boards. I put my weight on the first step, and it made a loud creak that echoed in the empty house. I climbed slowly, feeling the wood bend a little under me. At the top, I saw a short hallway. To the left was a door that looked closed. To the right, another door slightly open. I smelled something stale, like old paper left in a wet box. I could see faint marks on the floorboards, but it was too dark to tell what they were. I shined the flashlight along the wall. The paint was cracked, and I saw long shadows moving along it, but I was not moving the light. I stood still. My hands shook. The shadows drifted, as if they were alive. I felt a chill crawl up my back. I could not explain it. I was shaking now, my heart thumping hard, but I did not run. I tried to steady my breathing. I tried to think clearly. I moved to the door on the right. I pushed it open with my foot. It made a dry scraping sound. Inside, there was an empty room with a window facing the hill. The window pane was dirty. There was a pile of old blankets in the corner. I saw some kind of dark stain on the floor. I leaned closer, shining the light. It looked like old mud. It was dry and cracked. I heard a tapping sound near the window. I turned and saw the window rattling a bit, but there was no breeze. The glass trembled softly, tapping against the frame. My chest tightened. I felt sweat on my forehead. I wiped it with my sleeve. I stepped back into the hallway. I checked the other door. It was stuck. I pushed harder, and it popped open with a sudden snap. Inside this second room, I saw a small dresser with its drawers pulled out. They were empty. A chair sat in the corner with no seat, just the frame. The window in this room was closed too, and I noticed something strange. The window locked on its own. The latch slid down. I froze and watched it. My flashlight beam shook. I kept shining it on the latch, trying to see if I had imagined it. It did not move again. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. It was a low hum like before. I turned around, shining the light into the hallway. I saw nothing. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I listened. The voice continued, almost a whisper, singing some kind of tune without real words. It seemed to come from downstairs now. I walked back down the hallway, careful not to slip on the steps. Every board groaned under my weight. In the main room again, I stood still and waited. The voice faded. There was a gentle noise, like fabric brushing against wood. I turned toward the kitchen. I moved slowly, shining the light ahead, stepping around the broken table and the pile of leaves. I saw the back door of the kitchen. It had no handle and was boarded up with a couple of loose planks. I tried to pull one, but it was stuck. Then I heard something to my left, a soft scuffling sound. I aimed the flashlight that way. Nothing. Just a wall and some broken shelves. I felt my mouth go dry. My stomach felt hollow. I could feel my legs tense. The air felt thick and I kept taking small breaths. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I wanted to leave, but I told myself I had to see more. I had come all this way. I did not believe in ghosts, but I could not ignore what I was seeing and hearing. I went back to the main room and stood near the stairs. I shined my light on the walls. I saw the shadows again. They stretched along the surface, shifting slowly, never forming any clear shape. I moved the flashlight around, trying to see if it was a trick of the light. The shadows did not match anything in the room. They changed size and length as I watched. My throat felt tight. I felt cold sweat between my shoulder blades. Then I heard the humming again, this time very close, as if right behind me. I swung around with the flashlight, my heart thumping hard. I saw no one. I reached out with my free hand, feeling the air. It was empty. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. I repeated it louder. "Who's in here?" Nothing. I realized my hand holding the flashlight was shaking badly. My knees felt weak. I bent down and placed a hand on the floor to steady myself. The boards felt dry and rough. I took a moment to slow my breathing. Then I stood up and decided to check upstairs again. Maybe I had missed something. Climbing the stairs a second time felt heavier. My legs trembled. At the top, I stood in the hallway and listened. Silence. I checked the first room. The blankets in the corner were undisturbed. I approached them, shining the flashlight. They were old and smelled bad. I poked them with my boot. Dust puffed up. I saw nothing underneath. When I turned back to the hallway, I heard the window rattle again. I walked over and pressed my hand against it. The glass was cool. There was no wind outside. The moon was behind some clouds now, making the room even darker. In the other room, I checked the dresser. Nothing inside, just empty space and a smell of old wood. The chair in the corner creaked softly. I shined the flashlight on it. The chair did not move. I placed my hand on its back. It felt solid. Then I let go and stepped back. I kept waiting to hear the humming again, but it stayed silent. I walked back downstairs. My throat felt scratchy. I coughed. The dust tasted bitter. In the main room, I looked for a light switch, but I did not expect it to work. I found one and clicked it. Nothing happened. I moved toward the front door. I wanted to see if it had locked behind me. I tried the handle. It turned easily. I opened the door and looked outside. Everything looked normal. The grass, the slope, my car's dark shape at the bottom. The air outside felt fresher. I considered leaving right then. But I felt angry at myself. I didn't want to leave without understanding what was going on. I decided to stay a bit longer. I shut the door again and went back inside. I checked the kitchen more thoroughly. I opened a small cabinet near the sink. Inside, I found old jars with no labels. They were empty, just dusty glass. The faucet on the sink was dry. I tried turning it, but nothing came out. Suddenly, I heard a noise from upstairs, a scraping sound like something being dragged across the floor. I rushed to the staircase and looked up. My flashlight beam trembled. I saw nothing on the stairs. I climbed again, faster this time, ignoring my shaky knees. In the hallway, I smelled something new. It smelled like damp soil and old leaves. I shined the light at the floor. I saw a fresh clump of dirt that had not been there before. It looked wet. I bent down and touched it with my fingertip. It felt gritty. Where did it come from? I stood up and checked the rooms again. Both were unchanged, but the humming started up again, quieter this time, almost inside my head. I pressed a hand against my temple. I tried to follow the sound, walking slowly along the hallway, listening. It seemed to come from behind the walls, but there was no door there, just old boards. I tapped on the wall. It sounded hollow. I tried to see if there was a hidden panel, but I did not want to tear the place apart. The humming grew louder, then stopped. My heart was racing again. I felt a pain in my shoulder from holding the flashlight so tightly. I switched hands. My mouth felt dry. I coughed again, clearing my throat. The air tasted stale. I decided I had seen enough. I walked downstairs, careful and slow, and stood near the door. I wanted to remember everything I had seen. The rattling windows, the drifting shadows, the strange humming voices, the dirt that appeared out of nowhere. I could not explain any of it. My head was pounding. My stomach felt uneasy. My neck was stiff. Before leaving, I stood in the middle of the main room one last time and listened. I heard the faint sound of wood creaking upstairs, as if someone paced back and forth. I tried to ignore it. I aimed my flashlight at the walls. The shadows were still there. They moved without any source. I watched them slide along the old boards, then drift away. The windows rattled softly upstairs. I heard the low humming start again, but it was weaker, fading in and out. It felt like the house was breathing in silence, waiting for something else to happen. My face was warm, and I felt sweat along my collar. I stepped back and turned the doorknob. I opened the door and walked outside. The cool night air brushed against my face. I heard my boots against the grass. I walked down the slope, moving quickly now, feeling each step in my calves. I kept looking back. The house was just a dark shape against the sky. I could not see any lights inside. I could not hear any sounds from there anymore. When I reached my car, I leaned against it for a moment, breathing heavily. My arms felt shaky. I looked at my watch. Only an hour had passed since I arrived. It felt like longer. I wanted a drink of water, but I had none. I reached into the car, turned the ignition, and listened to the engine. The familiar sound calmed me a little. I rolled down the window and looked up at the hill. The house stood quietly, no movement visible from here. I could not prove anything that happened. I had no recordings. I had no explanations. But I knew what I saw and heard. I knew how it made me feel. My heart still beat fast, and my clothes smelled like that old place. I drove away, feeling my shoulders relax a bit as I left that hill behind. I stayed quiet, just focusing on the road ahead. I tried not to think too hard about it. I tried not to imagine the shadows moving on the walls again or the sound of that humming voice. The night was still dark, and I drove until I found a main road with streetlights. There, with some distance between me and that house, I felt safer. I still could feel the dryness in my mouth and the lingering taste of dust in my throat. My arms still felt tense, and I kept replaying the strange moments in my head. But I said nothing. I just kept driving, watching the yellow lines on the asphalt pass under my headlights. By the time I reached more familiar territory, I felt certain I would never return to that place. I did not have a reason to go back. I had seen enough. I knew I would remember every detail for a long time. It was enough to know that the house stood there, alone on the hill, full of quiet noises and moving shadows, with no clear explanation. I parked my car near a motel and sat there for a while with the engine off, just breathing and looking straight ahead. My clothes still smelled musty, and I felt a dull ache in my neck. I sat there until my heartbeat slowed to something normal. Then I went inside and got a room, turned on a lamp, and tried to rest. I could not forget the sound of those whispers and how they made my skin crawl, but I had left the house behind, and that was all that mattered now. I woke up with my heart pounding. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but the inside of my small tent. I had chosen a remote campsite the night before, hoping to avoid noise and interruptions. There had been no official campground, just a patch of flat ground near a dirt road. I had parked my car a short distance away, turned off the engine, and stretched out in my sleeping bag inside my tent. I remember the silence when I closed my eyes. No traffic, no voices, just a distant rustling of leaves in the breeze. When I went to sleep, I felt calm and alone. But now I was awake, and something was off. I heard low voices outside. At first I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. My mind was slow, still thick with sleep. I stayed still and listened. I heard whispers, but I couldn't catch the words. There were several voices, all low and quiet. They were close, too close. I held my breath and tried to figure out where they were. I turned my head toward the tent's entrance. The whispers were coming from somewhere around my car. The sound of their voices was not steady. It came in broken phrases, followed by silence, and then more whispers. I kept still for a few seconds. My heart was thumping in my chest. I felt sweat forming on my forehead, under my arms, on my palms. I didn't know who these people were or what they wanted. I couldn't see anything from inside the tent. The fabric was thin, but it was still dark outside, and I couldn't make out shapes through the material. I considered my options. I had a flashlight by my sleeping bag. I had a folding knife in my backpack. I also had the car keys in my jacket pocket. If these people were near my car, they might have already messed with it. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but I felt anxious. I needed to look. I decided to unzip the tent just a little, enough to peek out. I moved my hand slowly, trying not to make noise. The zipper sounded too loud in the quiet darkness. I paused. The whispers stopped. I waited. I could feel the night air against my face. It was cold and damp. The smell of wet grass and dirt filled my nose. After a few moments of silence, I heard the voices again, but they seemed quieter, as if they were trying to stay hidden. I opened the tent flap just an inch or two and looked out. My car was about 15 feet away. I had parked it behind some bushes to keep it out of sight from the road. Now I saw silhouettes around it, maybe 4 or 5 figures. They were all crouched low, moving slowly around the car, touching the doors, looking through the windows, pressing their faces against the glass. I saw no lights, no cell phone screens, no flashlights, just their dark shapes against the faint starlight. I could not see their faces. They wore dark clothes, maybe jackets with hoods. I heard their quiet voices again, words I couldn't make out, but they seemed to be discussing something about the car. I heard soft tapping sounds, as if they were trying the door handles. My throat felt dry. I reached slowly for my flashlight, but then I changed my mind. If I turned on a light, I might startle them, or draw their attention right to me. I stayed quiet. I thought about what I could do. If they were trying to steal my car, I had to do something, but there were several of them, and I was alone. I thought about sneaking out the back of the tent and creeping around. but there was no back entrance. There was only one zipper. If I tried to leave, I would make noise, and I didn't know how they would react. I lay there for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling my chest rise and fall. I could feel a chill on my skin. I listened carefully. Their voices were steady, but I still couldn't make out the words. They were very quiet. I wondered if they knew I was nearby. Maybe they assumed the car was empty. Maybe they thought nobody was around. My campsite was minimal, just my tent, a small fire pit I had dug earlier, and my car. I had no chairs or tables, nothing that would suggest a person sleeping inside the tent. The tent was low and set under a tree. In the darkness, it might blend in. The idea of staying silent and hoping they would leave felt risky. They might try to break in, or they might damage something. I needed that car to get out of here. Without it, I would be stuck in the middle of nowhere. I thought about calling out to them, asking what they wanted, but I was afraid that would only make things worse. I didn't know if they were armed or if they were looking for trouble. I decided to watch them for a bit longer. Maybe they would give up and go away. I stared through the opening of my tent, careful not to move too much. I saw one of them lean against the driver's side door. I heard a soft scratching sound. It made me tense up. The person next to him reached for the handle again. I could see their shape moving slowly, testing the door. The car was locked, but I didn't like how determined they seemed. I reached for my backpack and felt for my knife. I found it and held it tight. It was a small folding knife, not much use against multiple people, but it felt better than nothing. I considered trying to scare them off. If I shouted, would they run away? Or would they come after me? I had no idea. I didn't know what kind of people they were or what they wanted. They might be locals who found my car and got curious. Or maybe they were out looking for something to steal and had stumbled on my campsite by chance. My heart kept pounding. My breathing felt shallow. My stomach was tight. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. I rubbed my face with my free hand and tried to stay calm. I decided I needed more information. If I could hear what they were saying, maybe I could figure out their intentions. I leaned forward a bit more, pressing my ear toward the opening. The ground felt cold under my elbows. The night air on my face made my eyes water slightly. I listened hard, trying to pick out words. I caught fragments. Something about under the seat. Something about check the trunk. Their voices were low and rough. I couldn't tell their ages, and I didn't recognize any accents. They might have been locals, or they might have come from somewhere else. I couldn't tell. They kept whispering, stopping every time someone made a noise, then starting again. They didn't seem in a hurry, but they didn't seem relaxed either. They moved around slowly, but with purpose. I waited another minute, then decided I had to do something. They were not leaving. If they managed to get inside my car, they would find my stuff. They would see my food, my spare clothes, my map, my phone charger. They might try to steal something. If I lost my car, I would be stranded. I had no phone signal out here. I hadn't seen another person in miles. I moved carefully, closing the tent flap again. Inside the darkness of the tent, I took a deep breath. I put the knife in my jacket pocket and zipped it shut so I wouldn't lose it. I took my flashlight and held it in my hand, finger ready on the switch. If I was going to confront them, I needed some advantage. Light could startle them, at least for a moment. I could shout, try to sound confident, tell them to back off. If they scattered, I could jump to the car and drive away. But if they rushed me, I'd have to run. There were 4 or 5 of them. I couldn't fight them. I thought about just waiting longer, but I felt time was running out. I heard them try the door handle again, this time with a bit more force. That was it. I had to act. I needed to let them know someone was here, that I wasn't going to let them do what they wanted. Maybe they would think twice if they knew the owner was right there. I unzipped the tent flap in one quick motion and stepped out, shining my flashlight straight at the car. The beam lit up their dark shapes. They jerked back, shielding their faces. I saw maybe 5 of them, all wearing dark hooded jackets. They looked dirty, as if they'd been out here for a while. None of them said a word at first. I held the light steady and tried to keep my voice firm. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I said. My voice sounded shaky to my own ears, but I tried to ignore that. They froze, glancing at each other. I took a few steps forward, still shining the light on them. I kept a good distance. My heart was hammering, and I could feel sweat trickle down my back. "Step away from my car," I said, louder this time. They didn't respond. One of them, a bit taller than the others, raised a hand to block the light. I saw the shape of his jawline under the hood, but not much else. He didn't move toward me. Another one took a step back. The others stood still. My hand holding the flashlight trembled slightly, so I held it with both hands, trying to look steady. I felt the cold night air on my face. I felt my legs tense, ready to run if I had to. I could smell the damp earth and the faint scent of my own sweat. I tightened my jaw and waited. I didn't know what they would do. They just stood there, silent, facing me, their faces hidden in the glare. "I don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep it simple. "Just leave my car alone." Still no answer. One of them turned his head slightly, as if checking with the others. Then the taller one lifted his hand in a slight gesture, maybe signaling them. I couldn't read their expressions. They weren't making sudden moves. They just stood there. I wondered if they had a plan. I tried not to blink. My eyes burned from staring into the darkness beyond the flashlight beam. I took another step forward, trying to look confident. "Go on," I said. "Get out of here." My voice came out louder than I intended. I felt my throat tighten. I moved the flashlight beam from one figure to the next, as if checking each one. I had no idea if they were armed. I saw no weapons, but that didn't mean much in the dark. They started to shuffle back. One moved to the side, stepping into the bushes. Another followed him. They didn't speak. I watched them carefully. The taller one stood his ground for a few more seconds, then he also backed away. I could see them retreating, their outlines moving into the darkness. My flashlight couldn't reach them once they were behind the bushes. I heard rustling leaves, a few steps on the dirt, and then silence. I listened hard, waiting to see if they were gone. I couldn't hear anything. The night was quiet again, except for my own breathing and the distant hum of some insect. I stayed where I was, flashlight raised, scanning the area. My heart was still pounding, and I felt a slight tremor in my legs. I turned slowly, shining the light around the campsite. Nothing else moved. I went to my car and checked the doors. They were locked, no windows broken. I looked at the paint and the handles. I didn't see major damage, just a few scratches. The trunk was still closed. The tires looked fine. I peered into the back seat. Everything seemed in place. I stepped back and rubbed the back of my neck, trying to relax. I looked in the direction they had gone. It was just darkness and trees. I wasn't going to chase them. I wanted to leave. I decided I wouldn't stay here until morning. I wasn't going to sleep again anyway. I felt too tense and worried that they might come back. I had no idea what their deal was, but I didn't want to find out. I went back to the tent, grabbed my sleeping bag, shoved it into its sack, and threw it into the car. I took my backpack, my jacket, and my few other belongings and tossed them all inside. I moved fast, not bothering to fold the tent properly. I just pulled it up, shook off the dirt, and stuffed it into the trunk. I took one last look around, then got in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I started the engine and turned on the headlights. The beam of the headlights showed nothing but an empty dirt clearing and some bushes. No sign of anyone. I drove back onto the dirt road, trying not to skid on the loose gravel. My mind was racing. I replayed the scene in my head, how they all stood there, how they didn't say a word. I gripped the wheel tight and kept checking the rearview mirror, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. There were no other cars around, no lights, no houses, just darkness. As I drove, I felt my breathing ease up a bit. My chest felt less tight. My hands still trembled, but less than before. I turned on the radio, hoping to catch some signal, maybe hear some music, but there was nothing but static. I turned it off. I just focused on the road. I planned to drive until I found somewhere safer, Maybe a truck stop or a small motel. Anywhere with lights and people around. I wondered what those figures wanted. Were they just looking for something to steal? Were they planning to strip my car for parts? I would never know. What mattered now was that I was out of there. I felt relief that nothing worse happened. They didn't attack me and I didn't have to fight them. I kept driving, feeling the tension slowly fade with each mile I put between me and that campsite. I stayed on that rural road until I reached a paved 2-lane highway. I saw a sign pointing toward a small town about 20 miles ahead. I decided to drive straight there, find a place with a lighted parking lot and rest in the car if I had to. I didn't want to set up the tent again. I just wanted to feel safe. My body was still on edge, my muscles sore from crouching and tensing up. I rolled down the window and let the cool air hit my face. It felt good to breathe fresh air while moving fast on the open road. I kept thinking about how silent they were. They didn't yell, didn't threaten me directly. They just tried to get in the car. Maybe they thought the car was abandoned. Maybe they didn't know I was there until I came out with the flashlight. I guess I'll never know. It didn't matter now. I was glad I acted, even if it felt risky. At least I still had my car and my belongings. At least I could drive away. As I approached the small town, I saw a gas station with bright lights. It looked like it was open. I pulled in, parked near the front door, and got out to stretch. The parking lot was empty except for one other car at the pump. The neon sign buzzed softly. The cold air still smelled like dirt and grass, but here it was mixed with a hint of gasoline. I went inside, bought a bottle of water, and asked if there was a motel nearby. The clerk told me there was one about a mile down the road. I thanked him, got back in my car, and headed out. My hands were still shaking a bit, but I felt better knowing I was close to a safe place. I would find a room, lock the door, and try to sleep. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked tired. My face felt tight. I took a long sip of water and swallowed hard. I just wanted to rest and forget that weird scene in the middle of the night. I turned on my headlights again and focused on the road ahead. No more dark figures, just a quiet drive to a place with other people around. That was all I needed for now. It was late, past midnight, and the rain fell hard. There were no cars on the street. No one walked by. The pavement shined under the streetlights, and my sneakers pressed into thin puddles. My jacket was soaked. I was heading for the bus stop at the corner, hoping to catch the last bus home. I just wanted to stand under some kind of roof and wait in peace, but I felt uneasy. The wind blew rain into my face. I tasted wet grit on my lips. My head ached. I wanted nothing except to get on that bus, sit down, and close my eyes until I reached my place. Main text. I walked at a steady pace, hands in my jacket pockets, shoulders stiff. The sidewalk was slick. I was careful with my steps. Every few yards, the streetlights buzzed with a low hum. I listened to that sound and the rain hitting the empty plastic garbage bins lined up against a wall. The buildings on this block looked closed. No bars open, no lights inside. Just dark windows and heavy doors. I glanced at them out of habit, checking for any sign of life, but I saw nothing. As I approached the bus stop, I noticed how empty the shelter looked. It was just a small structure with a plastic roof and a bench. The metal frame reflected the lights from across the street. I stepped under it, happy to have at least a little cover. The rain drummed on the roof. My jacket dripped onto the pavement. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I could see my breath when I exhaled, which surprised me. It wasn't that cold, but maybe the rain made everything feel heavier. The bus schedule was behind dirty glass. I leaned closer, squinting to read. My bus was supposed to come in about 15 minutes, maybe less if I was lucky. I sighed, looked around, and then stepped back toward the edge of the shelter, peering down the street. Nothing. Just a wet road, dark shops, and a few flickering lights in the distance. Then I heard my name. It was quiet at first, but it was my name. I froze. My muscles tightened. I turned, expecting to see someone behind me, Maybe on the other side of the street. I saw no one. I listened carefully. The rain made constant noise, and the wind pushed it around. The sound of distant traffic drifted in from some main road nearby, but no footsteps, no rustling clothes, no voice. I convinced myself I was tired and hearing things. I stepped under the shelter again and shook my head. After a minute, I heard it again. This time it was a bit louder. It was definitely a human voice calling my name. I looked to my left, saw nothing. I looked to my right, still nothing. My heart started to beat faster. I took a step forward out from under the shelter and turned in a full circle. No one. The voice had sounded close, but there was no shape, no person, no movement. My clothes stuck to my skin. My face felt hot even though the rain cooled my cheeks. I swallowed hard, trying to calm down. I thought maybe someone was behind the corner of the building next to the bus stop. I walked a few steps toward it, water sloshing at my ankles. I leaned forward and looked around the corner. Just more empty sidewalk, some parked cars, a mailbox. No one stood there. I frowned, annoyed and worried. I felt stupid. I returned to the shelter, looked at my watch, and tried to focus on the time. About 10 minutes to go, maybe less. I tried to ignore what I heard, but the voice came again. It called my name twice in a row this time, slightly louder, like someone was trying to get my attention. The sound direction confused me. It seemed to come from behind me, then from across the street, then from a spot near the bus schedule. I spun around, scanning each spot. The lighting was good enough that I would see a person if they were close, but no one was there. I tried to speak. "Hello?" I said, my voice low. "Who's there?" No answer, just the rain. My breathing grew quicker. My palms felt damp inside my pockets. I gripped my phone and took it out. The screen was wet. I tried to wipe it on my jacket. The battery was low, about 10%. I considered calling someone, but it felt stupid to bother anyone this late. Also, what would I say? That I heard my name in the rain at an empty bus stop? I cleared my throat and called out again. "I know you're out there," I said, a bit louder. Still no response. I waited, listening for footsteps or laughter. Maybe it was a prank, some person hiding and messing with me. But there was no laughter. Nothing at all. Just the damn rain. I stepped out from under the shelter and walked a few feet to the left, looking into a narrow alley. The alley smelled like wet trash and old oil. I saw boxes and a closed metal door, but no people. I strained my ears, but I heard nothing. I turned around and checked the other direction. A few old newspaper stands, a locked bike chained to a pole, and a row of dark windows. No one there either. Back at the shelter, I tried to keep calm. My heart wouldn't slow down. I was breathing hard. I wiped my face again and muttered under my breath, telling myself to relax. It was just a weird coincidence. Maybe I misheard something else, like the wind or a distant TV inside a building. I looked at my watch. 5 minutes, maybe. The bus should be here soon. I decided to stand still and wait. I would see headlights eventually. Then I heard it again. This time it was very close, as if someone stood right behind me. My name, spoken slowly, not too loud, but with a certain firmness. I jerked around, raising my arm slightly. No one stood there. The bench was empty. I felt a chill run through my body. My neck muscles were stiff. I could feel a dull ache in my shoulder. I backed up toward the street, away from the shelter. The rain hit my face directly now. It stung my eyes. I shouted, "I can hear you. Stop messing around." My voice sounded strange, flat. I waited for something to happen. The wind blew my hood off my head, and I pulled it back up. I tried not to panic, but my chest felt tight. My head pounded at my temples. The voice was too real. I knew what I heard. It said my name, no question about it. I turned and looked down the street, hoping to see the bus. I saw a faint light in the distance. It could be headlights. I hoped it was. I needed to get out of here. As I watched that light, I heard the voice one more time. It sounded like it came from across the street now. I whipped my head around and saw nothing but a closed store with a metal gate. The windows were dark. I stepped onto the curb, into the empty road, just to get a better look. The pavement was wet and slippery, and I almost lost my balance. I managed to stay upright. I waited, standing in the rain, looking at every corner, every possible hiding spot. Not a single figure moved. My clothes felt heavier now. My socks were damp. I clenched my jaw, feeling a dull tension there. The voice didn't speak again. I listened for it carefully, counting the seconds in my head. Nothing. Just the hum of a distant engine somewhere, and the slap of rain on pavement. I turned back to face the direction of the bus. The light was getting closer. I saw a shape now, a large vehicle rolling slowly toward me. It had to be my bus. I moved back to the shelter and waited. I checked behind me again, then scanned the area. Still no one. My heart was still beating fast, but I felt some relief knowing I could get out of there soon. The thought of riding that bus, even for a few minutes, felt safer than standing there alone. When the bus pulled up, it splashed water onto the curb. I waved my arm and it stopped. The doors hissed open. The driver was a man with a thick jacket and tired eyes. He didn't say anything. I stepped inside, shaking water from my shoulders. I moved down the aisle and sat near the middle. There was no one else inside. The interior lights were dim, and I could hear the soft rumble of the engine. The doors closed, and we rolled forward. As the bus moved, I watched the street through the window. The shelter and the buildings slid by, then disappeared. I tried to relax, but I kept thinking about that voice. I checked my phone, still low battery. I thought about texting a friend, but I didn't know what to say. I looked around the bus. Empty seats, slightly dirty floor, a faint smell of wet rubber. I heard the driver cough once. I tried to calm my breathing, then I heard it again. My name, inside the bus this time. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I turned around in my seat, looking at the back of the bus. There were only empty seats. The doors were closed. No one had boarded after me. I stared at the empty rows, waiting for a figure to appear. Nothing moved. I got up and walked toward the back, holding onto the seat tops to keep my balance as the bus shook slightly on the wet road. I checked every seat. No one was there. I looked at the floor, saw some wet footprints that must have been mine. I listened for breathing, for any sign of movement. There was nothing, just the steady growl of the engine. I walked back to my seat. I felt my stomach twist. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry despite the rain. I wiped my face again. I whispered to myself, telling myself that I was just hearing things. Maybe the voice was in my head. Maybe I was tired. But I knew it sounded real. It sounded like a real person calling my name, not once or twice, but several times. I decided to speak to the driver. I got up and moved forward, careful not to slip. I leaned toward his seat. "Hey," I said. "Did you hear anyone back there?" He glanced at me in the mirror. He shrugged. "No," he said. His voice was rough. "Just you and me." I nodded and forced a half smile. "Never mind," I said, stepping back. He didn't seem concerned. He probably dealt with strange passengers all the time. I returned to my seat and sat down, crossing my arms. The bus moved through quiet streets, passing closed stores and dimly lit parking lots. I watched the reflections on the windows and tried to forget about the voice, but my nerves were still on edge. Every time we passed a streetlight, I expected to see someone standing in the dark, watching the bus. I kept glancing at the aisle, expecting someone to appear. I considered getting off early and walking home, but the rain was still heavy. I didn't want to be out there again alone. At least here I was moving, and I could see everything inside. No one could hide here. Still, the memory of the voice made my hands shake a little. I tucked them under my arms. My clothes were starting to dry, but I still felt cold. A few minutes later, the bus approached my stop. I pulled the cord and stood up. The bus slowed down and came to a stop with a slight jerk. The doors opened and I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The rain had eased a bit, now just a steady drizzle. I looked around. The street near my apartment was also quiet, but more familiar. A few parked cars and some apartment windows with lights on. I felt safer here. I stood for a moment, breathing slowly. No voice called my name. No strange sounds. I turned and looked at the bus. The driver gave a small nod, then closed the doors and drove off. I watched the taillights disappear. I was alone again, but I didn't feel the same tension as before. I started walking toward my apartment building, my sneakers squishing on the wet pavement. On the way, I kept an eye on every corner. I heard only normal sounds, water dripping from gutters, a distant siren somewhere, the hum of a heating unit on a rooftop. No voices, no one calling my name. I wondered if I had imagined the entire thing. Maybe I had dozed off for a moment at the stop, half dreaming, but I knew I had been wide awake. When I reached my building, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The lobby was quiet. The air smelled like detergent. I pressed the elevator button. I waited, tapping my foot. My shoulders were still tense, and I rubbed my neck. As the elevator doors opened, I couldn't shake off the memory of that voice. I got inside, pressed my floor number, and watched the doors close. I was alone again, but inside familiar walls, away from the rain and the street. I reached my apartment, unlocked it, and stepped in. The place was dark and smelled like my usual laundry soap and stale coffee. I turned on a lamp and locked the door behind me. I peeled off my wet jacket and hung it over a chair. The sound of rain was distant now, just a soft hiss outside my window. I listened carefully, expecting something, anything, but I heard nothing, just my own breathing. My heart finally slowed down. I felt my muscles relax a bit. I slipped out of my shoes and socks, dried my face with a towel from the bathroom, and then came back to the living room. I leaned against the wall and thought about what happened. I knew I wasn't going to find any answers tonight. I decided to forget it for now. I was home, safe, and there was no voice calling my name here. I moved to the window and looked outside. The street was quiet, just a few parked cars and a light in the distance. The rain still fell, but softer. No one stood outside. I watched for a few seconds, then pulled the curtains closed. I turned on the TV, not too loud, just enough to break the silence. I told myself that tomorrow was another day, and I would probably laugh about this whole thing later. For now, I was just glad it was over. I sat down and tried to let it go. I was tired and I needed to rest. There was nothing else to do. The bus stop and that voice were far away, and I was inside, warm and alone with my thoughts, not with anyone else's voice. I moved into the old house on a Monday afternoon. I had spent most of the morning carrying boxes upstairs, unpacking kitchen items, and opening and closing cabinets that smelled like dust and old paint. The house looked like it had not been updated in decades. The floors were wooden and creaked when I walked. The windows were stiff, and the light switches were old, with small clicking sounds every time I turned them on or off. I had chosen this house because it was cheap and had a lot of space. I wanted a quiet place. I wanted a place where I could work without distractions. There were no immediate neighbors close by. The closest one was about a 5-minute walk down the gravel road. That first day, I just tried to settle in. I arranged my furniture and tried to decide which room would be my bedroom. I picked the one facing the back garden because it had more sunlight. By late afternoon, I decided to check the attic. I had seen the narrow staircase in the hallway, a small door in the ceiling with a pull-down ladder. I had not bothered going up there yet. There was no electricity in the attic, so I carried a small flashlight. I climbed the ladder slowly. The ladder creaked under my weight. The air up there was stale. I felt a slight chill on my arms. I pointed the flashlight around and saw old boxes, a few chairs with chipped paint, and a couple of trunks with leather straps. Some dust floated in the air, making me cough a bit. I moved toward the far corner, stepping carefully to avoid stepping through any weak spots in the floor. I saw a small suitcase. It was brown and old, and it looked like something from a different era. I noticed it had a thick metal lock on it. The lock was closed, and there was no key nearby. The suitcase was wedged behind a wooden crate. I pulled it out. I ran my hand over its surface. The leather was cracked. The handle felt stiff. I shook it a bit, and something inside slid around. It sounded like clothing or fabric. I carried it down to the main floor and placed it on the dining table. The suitcase smelled like mold and old cloth. I wanted to open it, but I did not have the key. I decided I would pick the lock. I got a small screwdriver and a thin piece of wire from my toolkit. It took me a few tries. The lock was rusted. I wiggled the wire around and tried different angles. After a couple of minutes, I heard a soft click. I lifted the latch and opened the suitcase. Inside, I found old clothes. They looked like men's shirts, pants, and a jacket, all folded neatly. On top of the clothes, I saw a bundle of letters tied with a thin piece of twine. I picked them up and untied them. Each letter had a date on the top. I saw dates like July 1958, December 1963, and August 1972. The paper was yellowish and a bit brittle. The handwriting was neat, with straight lines and steady pressure. I sat down and opened one letter at random. I expected it to be something about the original owner of the house, maybe some family story. But as I read, I realized it was describing something very familiar. It described the day I had arrived at the house. It mentioned how I parked my truck near the porch, how I carried boxes in through the front door, how I struggled with the largest box and ended up dropping it in the entryway. I had done that only a few hours ago. I looked at the date on that letter. It said September 1975. The handwriting looked old, the paper looked old, and the ink seemed faded. My hands felt sweaty. My heart started beating faster. I put that letter aside and picked another one. It described me sitting at the dining table, wearing a dark green t-shirt, opening a locked suitcase that I found in the attic. It said I was nervous and kept wiping sweat from my forehead. It described my every movement, my every reaction to finding the letters. The date on that one said January 1970. The details were too accurate. There was no way someone could have written it after watching me. There was nobody else in the house. I had not told anyone about the suitcase. It was late afternoon on the same day I had moved in. The letter described my actions as if they had happened decades ago. I felt a heavy pressure in my chest. I stood up, walked around the room and checked the windows. Nobody was outside. I locked the front door. I picked a third letter. It described events that had happened in my life a few years ago, before I moved here. It described where I used to live, and how I used to spend my weekends fixing an old car in my driveway. It said I always got grease on my left forearm. It said I usually wore gloves but always ended up with a thin line of grease near my elbow anyway. I remembered that. It was such a small detail. The letter's date said March 1961. I had not even been born yet. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe someone wrote these letters recently and put fake dates on them. Maybe it was a prank by the seller of the house. But the paper felt old. The ink looked old. The clothes in the suitcase looked like they came from the mid-20th century. I took a flashlight and went back to the attic to look for anything else. I stepped slowly, feeling nervous. My stomach felt tight, and my neck muscles were stiff. I pointed the flashlight around. The attic was quiet. I touched the beams, looked behind crates, checked inside a trunk. Everything looked normal. I found old newspapers, a broken lamp, a rolled-up rug. Nothing unusual. I came back downstairs and looked at the letters again. There were about 20 letters. Each had a date from a different decade, ranging from the late 1950s to the early 1980s. I opened another one. It described me drinking a bottle of beer and feeling uncertain about whether to stay in this house. It said I would read these letters and wonder if I should call someone. I felt a chill run down my arms. I was holding a beer bottle at that moment. I had opened it right after I came down from the attic to calm my nerves. I looked at the bottle. My hand was shaking slightly. I wanted to see if the letters mentioned anything else that was going to happen next. Maybe I could catch them in a lie. Maybe if the letter said I would do something and I decided not to do it, I could prove they were just random stories. I took another letter and read it carefully. It said that after reading these letters, I would take the clothes out of the suitcase and lay them on the bed to inspect them. It said I would count them: 2 shirts, 1 jacket, 2 pairs of pants, and 1 tie. It said I would feel the fabric and notice a slight smell of mothballs. It said I would hold the tie up to the light and see a small stain near the bottom. I decided I would not do this. I would not follow these instructions. But after a few minutes, I felt the urge to check the clothes anyway. I wanted to confirm the details. I told myself I was in control. I approached the suitcase, reached in, and pulled out the clothes. There were indeed 2 shirts, 1 jacket, 2 pairs of pants, and a tie. I laid them on the bed in the bedroom. I felt the fabric. It was rough and thick. I smelled the clothes. They smelled old and dusty, maybe like mothballs. I held the tie up. There was a dark stain on the bottom. It looked like an old ink stain. I realized I had done exactly what the letter said. I felt sweat on my forehead again. I sat on the bed and tried to calm down. I stared at the letters. I had them spread out on the table in the other room. The sun was setting outside. The light was turning orange. I turned on a lamp. The lamp flickered. I looked around for a phone. My cell phone had a weak signal out here. I tried calling a friend, but the call dropped. I wanted to tell someone, but I could not explain this. I decided to try something else. I took another letter at random. It said that after inspecting the clothes, I would write down my thoughts in a small notebook, and then hide the notebook in the drawer of the nightstand. I did not want to do that. I put the letter aside and focused on something else. I told myself I would not write anything down. Instead, I got up and searched the house. I looked inside closets, under the bed, behind doors, and behind the kitchen cabinets. I wanted to see if there was a hidden camera or something that would explain this. I found nothing. The house was empty. The doors and windows were locked. I walked outside and looked around. The backyard was overgrown with weeds. The shed in the corner was empty. It was getting dark, and I could hear some distant sounds of insects. I came back inside and sat at the kitchen table. I tried to think of a reason for all this, but my mind was blank. I just knew that these letters described my life in detail, and they were dated decades before I was even born. I read another letter. It mentioned a scar I had on my left forearm. I got that scar a few years ago when I slipped on wet pavement and cut myself on a metal railing. The letter described it as a thin, slightly raised line on the left arm, about 3 inches long. It said I had that scar because I was clumsy and not paying attention one morning in my old place. It even mentioned the type of railing. I checked my arm. The scar was there, exactly as described. There was no explanation for how these letters knew all these details. I tried burning one of the letters. I thought maybe if I destroyed them I could break the pattern. I held it over the kitchen sink, lit a match, and set the corner on fire. The paper burned slowly, the smoke smelled acrid. The ashes fell into the sink. I watched the flame until it went out. I checked the rest of the letters. I looked at another one. It said that I would try to burn one letter out of frustration and fear, and that I would do it in the kitchen sink. It said I would watch it burn and feel uneasy. That just happened. I felt sweat forming under my arms. My back was tense. I wanted to leave the house, but I had nowhere else to go. I had signed a lease. I had moved all my stuff here. I tried to laugh it off, but I could not find anything funny. I decided to test the letters again. I picked one and looked for a future action. One letter said that after destroying a letter, I would place the clothes back inside the suitcase, lock it, and return it to the attic. It said I would then regret doing that and go back up later to get it. I did not want to do any of that. I paced around the house. After a while, I realized I was just standing there doing nothing. The suitcase was still on my bed with the clothes spread out. I thought about leaving the suitcase where it was, but the thought of leaving those clothes and letters out in the open bothered me. I could not relax. I decided to do something else. I took the clothes and put them back in the suitcase. I closed the suitcase but did not lock it. I placed it under my bed. That was a small act of defiance. The letter said I would return it to the attic and lock it. I did something different. I waited. I waited for a while. I sat on the couch in the living room. The lights were on and the curtains were closed. I listened to the silence. I tapped my foot on the floor. Nothing happened. No strange noises. No sudden changes. I got up and checked the letters again. I wanted to see if there was any mention of me placing the suitcase under the bed. I flipped through them carefully. I found one letter that mentioned me eventually deciding not to follow the instructions and leaving the suitcase under the bed. It said that later, around midnight, I would start feeling restless and would move it to the attic anyway. I looked at the clock. It was around 10 p.m. I thought about staying awake until midnight just to prove the letter wrong. I was tired, but I forced myself to stay awake. I turned on the TV, found a channel with old reruns, and tried to watch something. The screen flickered a bit. The reception was bad. I got annoyed and turned it off. I checked my cell phone again. Still poor signal. I tried calling a friend but got no answer. I looked around the house. Everything was quiet. The letters were spread out on the dining table. The suitcase was under my bed. I got up to drink some water. The faucet squeaked. The pipes rattled slightly. Around midnight, I started feeling anxious. My hands were sweaty. My chest felt tight. I could not relax. I kept glancing toward the bedroom. I knew the suitcase was there. I kept thinking about what the letters said. I told myself it was nonsense. I told myself I had control, but the feeling would not go away. I got up, grabbed the suitcase, and climbed the ladder to the attic. My heart was pounding. I placed the suitcase back in its original spot, behind the crate. I locked it again with the rusty lock. I came back down. I checked the letters. They had said I would do exactly that. I had done it. I felt angry at myself. I felt like I was just following a script. I paced around, clenching my teeth. The letters had described every action I took. They predicted my attempts to resist. They knew every detail of my life. I had no explanation for it. I felt trapped, but I also felt curious. I took a deep breath and looked at the last letter. It said that in the morning I would wake up, go into the attic, and find one last note tucked inside the suitcase. It said the note would not be there before morning, and that I should not bother checking now. It said I would be too afraid to sleep well, that I would wake up tired and frustrated, and I would still go up and look. It said I would not find any answers, just more confusion. I did not want to follow that pattern. I told myself I would not go back to the attic in the morning. I would leave the suitcase alone. Maybe I would just move out of this house. The lease was month to month. I could leave at the end of the month. I felt restless, though. I lay down on the couch trying to sleep, but I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the letters and their detailed descriptions. They had no errors, no vague language. Everything was specific and accurate. My muscles were tense. My mouth felt dry. I got up and drank more water. I turned the lights off and on, checking each room. Everything looked normal, just old and worn. Eventually, I dozed off for a bit, maybe an hour or so. When I woke up, it was early morning. I looked out the window. It was getting light outside. I rubbed my face, feeling stubble on my chin. I felt dirty and wanted a shower, but I also felt this urge to see if there was a new note in the suitcase. I tried to ignore it. I drank some coffee. The coffee tasted bitter. I walked around the kitchen. My heart was beating faster than normal, and I felt shaky. I tried to tell myself that this was all some elaborate trick. Maybe old letters were planted here by someone who knew my habits. Maybe someone spied on me before I moved in. But how would they know things from years ago? I climbed the ladder to the attic again, holding the flashlight. The attic smelled stale. The suitcase was where I had left it. I approached it slowly, my legs feeling weak. I unlocked the suitcase with the screwdriver and wire again. I opened it. The clothes were folded just as before. I checked under them. There was a new note, a small piece of paper folded in half. It had no date. It said I would keep searching for answers, but I would not find them here. It said I would remain in this house for a while, unable to resist the urge to return to the attic again and again. It said I would spend my time trying to prove the letters wrong, but in the end, I would keep following their steps. I stood there feeling sweaty and angry. I felt my hands clench into fists. I looked at the paper. The handwriting was the same. The ink looked old, faded in places. I could not understand how it appeared. I had no memory of placing it there. I tried to think about the night before. I was sure I locked the suitcase. I tried to ignore the note. I took the clothes out, shook them, checked the suitcase's lining, looked for hidden compartments. I found nothing. I left the attic, locked it, and went downstairs. I spent the rest of the morning pacing around the house. The letters were still on the table. The note was in my pocket. I felt tense and exhausted. I realized that every time I tried to defy what the letters said, I ended up doing it anyway. My attempts to resist only delayed the actions. The letters described everything I did as if it had already happened. I could not find a pattern or a reason. I decided to keep the letters in a drawer and not look at them again. I closed them away and locked the drawer with a small padlock I had for my toolbox. For the next few hours, I tried to go about my normal life. I tried to unpack the rest of my things. I tried to focus on work. I opened my laptop, but I could not concentrate. I kept looking at the attic door, at the locked drawer. I opened the fridge and drank cold water. I touched my face, feeling sweat near my temples. I noticed the house was quiet. The floors creaked when I moved. I did not hear anything else. The silence made me feel uneasy. I wanted to leave, but I had no place to go. I had put a lot of money into moving here. I decided to ignore the letters. They could not control me if I stopped reading them. I took a shower, got dressed, and stepped outside. I walked along the gravel road toward the neighbor's place. I just wanted to ask if they knew anything about the house's history. Maybe they could explain the suitcase. Or maybe they would say that the previous owner was a strange collector of stories. When I got to the neighbor's place, there was no one home. The house looked empty. The driveway was clear. I knocked on the door a few times. No answer. I waited. Nothing. I walked back to my house. The sun was high now and it was hot. I felt sweat on my back. I went inside and stood in the foyer. I could smell the old paint and the dust. I did not want to read the letters again. I did not want to think about them. I wanted to just pretend I never found them. But I knew they were there, locked in that drawer. I knew the suitcase was in the attic. I could feel the tension in my neck and shoulders. My stomach felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it. I tried cleaning the rooms, wiping down surfaces, and organizing my belongings. Everything felt forced. I kept glancing toward the hallway. Eventually, I sat down in the living room with the TV on, not really watching it. I could hear the sound of my own breathing. I could hear the low hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. I felt stuck. I had no explanation for what had happened. The letters existed. They described my life. They were dated long before I was born. They predicted my actions. They matched every detail I tried to test. I knew I would never have a clear answer. The letters said I would keep searching, but find nothing. I believed them. I had no other choice. I did not understand how it worked, but it kept happening. I decided to stay away from the attic and the letters for now. I decided to just continue my life, even if I felt uneasy. I could not fight it. I could only acknowledge it. So I sat there, feeling the sweat dry on my skin, listening to the old refrigerator, and waiting for the next moment when I would give in and check the attic again. I stood in my new basement with my flashlight shaking in my hand. I saw something leaning against the far wall behind old crates and damp cardboard boxes. It looked like an old mirror with a chipped wooden frame. The light caught on its glass, and the reflection did not match the angle of my beam. I moved in closer, feeling sweat forming on my palms. The house was mine now, and I was supposed to get comfortable, but the basement smelled like rotten wood and old fabric. I pulled the mirror free, and the frame groaned and left flakes of paint on my fingers. That night, when I looked into it, I didn't see my own face. I saw something else, far away and strange. The next nights got worse, because I started hearing voices coming from inside it. I moved into my new house on a Saturday morning. The previous owner left a few old pieces of furniture and junk in the basement. I spent the day dragging boxes inside, stacking them in the hallway, and wiping dust off countertops. By late afternoon, I felt exhausted. My shirt stuck to my back. The house still smelled stale. The plumbing worked. The lights were fine. Everything seemed normal except for the basement. I left it for last because I didn't like how dark and cold it felt. When I finally went down there, the air felt damp. The concrete floor had cracks. There were no windows, just a single overhead bulb that hummed when turned on. The pile of old furniture stood to one side. I moved boxes out of the way. Then I saw the mirror. It leaned against the back wall behind a broken chair and a stack of old newspapers. Its frame looked chipped. The wood had a dull brown finish, and the corners had these small carved flowers. I remember touching it and feeling some loose flakes of paint come off on my fingertips. The mirror's glass looked cloudy at first glance, like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. I lifted it, thinking I could hang it upstairs or maybe toss it. It was heavy. I carried it to the ground floor and propped it against a bare wall in the hallway. At that point, I just wanted to shower and eat something. I remember looking into the mirror after I set it down. The light in that hallway was weak, just a floor lamp, but the glass didn't show my reflection. I took a step closer and aimed the flashlight from my phone at it. I saw vague shapes like distant lights and uneven ground, but not my own face. I adjusted my angle, thinking maybe it was tilted wrong, but still no reflection. Just faint, dark scenery that didn't match my house. I felt a weird cold sensation on my neck. I rubbed the back of my head and looked over my shoulder. Nothing was behind me. I stood there for maybe a minute, trying to understand why the mirror didn't show me. It showed something else, a place with tall, uneven shapes that might have been rocks or buildings far off. I blinked a few times and then forced myself to look at the rest of the house. I decided I'd come back to this later. That night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't relax. My bedroom was quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. I turned off the lamp around midnight. I remember lying there, eyes closed, breathing slow, when I thought I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like it came from downstairs. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just old pipes. Then it came again, like a soft voice. I sat up, listening. It faded. I got out of bed, heart pounding a bit harder than usual. I walked down the hallway and stood at the top of the stairs. I heard nothing. I went back to bed and finally fell asleep. The next morning I went straight to the mirror. It still leaned against the wall. In daylight, the glass looked clearer, but still no reflection. I saw a landscape of what might have been bare hills under a gray sky. I rubbed my eyes. I placed my hand on the glass. It felt cool and solid. I rapped my knuckles against it. It sounded normal, just glass against wood. I walked around to the back, plain wooden paneling. I flipped the mirror around and faced the wall with it. For a moment, I felt relieved. I decided to ignore it and unpack the rest of my things. That evening, after setting up my living room and making myself a quick meal, I turned the mirror around again. Now the view through the glass looked different. I saw a wide stretch of dark ground with tall shapes moving in the distance. They walked slowly, hunched over, not coming closer, but they were there. I couldn't make out any details of their faces or bodies, just shadowy figures. I stood very still, holding my breath. Then I leaned in and cupped my ear near the mirror's surface. I thought I heard faint breathing. I jerked back. My skin tingled. I didn't like it. I decided to carry the mirror downstairs and shove it back into the basement. I grabbed it by the sides and hauled it down carefully. The mirror felt heavier than before. My arms got tired halfway down. I set it up against a shelf. I left it facing the wall. I turned off the light and climbed back upstairs. Before going to bed, I locked the basement door. I wanted it out of sight and out of mind. I figured I could get rid of it at some point, maybe call a junk removal service. That night I heard voices again. It started as a soft murmur, then a faint rasping sound. I lay in bed with my blankets pulled up to my chest, listening. I couldn't catch any words. It sounded like low whispers. I got up and checked the house with a flashlight. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. The basement door was still locked. The sound seemed to come from below. I felt a chill run down my back. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I drank it slowly and just stood there, listening. Silence. In the morning, I decided to examine the mirror more carefully. I opened the basement door, turned on the light, and stepped down. The mirror was not facing the wall anymore. It stood leaning against the shelf, facing the center of the room. I did not remember turning it around that way. My stomach tightened. I approached it. The glass showed the same dark world, but now the figures looked closer. They stood on a surface that looked rough, like cracked soil. They shifted slowly, as if searching for something. I leaned in and watched closely. My breath fogged the glass a little, but behind that mist, I saw them move. There were several of them, all tall, all indistinct, some kind of distant shapes in a dark place. I tried to speak just to test. I said, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky. Nothing happened. I tapped the glass again. It felt solid. I pushed the mirror a bit. It scraped against the floor. I tried to lift it. I wanted to move it somewhere else. As I shifted it, I noticed a faint smell. It smelled like damp earth. I knelt down and sniffed the frame. It was definitely coming from the mirror. I let it go and backed off. For a few hours, I avoided the basement. I unpacked more boxes, arranged the living room furniture, and tested the TV. My mind kept drifting back to that mirror. At around noon, I tried to call the realtor who sold me the house. She didn't pick up. I left a short message asking if the previous owner left anything important behind. I paced around the living room. Then I headed back to the basement with a hammer in my hand. I wanted to see if I could crack the glass. I felt a nervous energy building inside me. If I broke it, maybe it would stop whatever was happening. I stood in front of the mirror and held the hammer. The figures inside the glass moved slowly. I raised the hammer and swung. The hammer struck the surface with a sharp ping. The mirror didn't crack. I swung again, harder this time. The hammer bounced off. No scratch, no chip. I pressed my fingernail against the glass. Not a single mark. My heart thumped. I lowered the hammer and stepped back, breathing through my nose. The mirror was not normal. I wiped sweat off my forehead and tried to calm down. I carried the mirror upstairs again. I dragged it to the living room. I left it facing the window. I stepped outside for a moment to see if it reflected through the glass. From outside, I saw my living room window. Nothing else. When I went back inside, the mirror still showed that distant world. I heard a soft scraping sound. I leaned in. Inside the mirror, I saw one of the shapes tilt its head upward, as if it was noticing me. My arms felt cold. I swallowed. I reached out and touched the glass again. It felt slightly colder than the air around me. For the next few hours, I tried covering it with a sheet. I used an old blanket and draped it over the frame. I left it in the corner of the living room and turned on the TV loud. I watched some stupid show just to block out my thoughts. I tried to eat something simple. I couldn't taste much. The air in the house felt heavier than before. After a while, I muted the TV and listened. I heard a soft knocking sound, like a distant tapping. It seemed to come from the corner where the mirror stood covered. I approached it slowly. I heard a low whisper, a kind of hiss. I stood still, holding my breath. I pulled the blanket off quickly. The figures were closer now, right near the glass. Their outlines looked more defined, like they had thin limbs and elongated heads. I saw no eyes, just dark forms. One reached out. pressing something like a hand against the other side of the glass. A faint smudge formed where it touched. I jumped back, clenching my teeth. My heart pounded. I decided I would put the mirror outside. I dragged it to the front door. When I tried to open the door, the knob jammed. I pulled and twisted. It finally opened. I stepped onto the porch and lifted the mirror's frame, intending to place it on the curb. But as soon as I set it down, the glass looked normal, just reflecting the street. I saw my own shape behind it, blurry but present. Confused, I tilted it and looked closely. Outside, the mirror acted normal. I carried it back inside to check. The moment I crossed the threshold, it changed again. Back to that other world. My pulse raced. I left it on the porch for a while, just staring. Outside, it was just a mirror, cracked frame and all, showing me my own reflection in the quiet street behind me. I tested it 3 times. Inside the house, it showed that other place. Outside the house, normal. I decided to leave it outside overnight. I went to bed feeling a bit better. Around midnight, I woke up to whispering sounds again. I sat up, confused. I remembered leaving the mirror outside. I went downstairs. The front door was closed and locked. The mirror was back inside, leaning against the hallway wall. My hands shook as I approached it. I couldn't figure out how it returned. I stared at the glass. The shapes were closer. One of them tapped the glass from inside, a steady, soft clicking. I backed away and sat on the couch. My mind raced. I tried calling a friend, but my phone battery was dead. I plugged it in and waited. The whispering continued. I plugged my ears with my fingers. The sound was still there, muffled. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed my toolbox. I had a crowbar. I tried prying the mirror's frame apart. The wood splintered a little, but the glass stayed intact. I spent maybe 10 minutes wrestling with it until my palms hurt. I gave up and tossed the crowbar aside. I stood in front of the mirror and stared back at the shapes. One raised its arm slowly, pressing its limb against the glass. Another leaned in, and I saw a faint outline of a face. It had no clear features, just a dark surface. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. My mouth felt dry. I whispered, "What do you want?" No answer. Just a soft scratching sound. I reached out and pressed my hand against the glass again. It felt colder than before. I tried to push, but it was solid. I leaned closer and listened. The whispers got clearer. I could hear low, raspy voices saying things I couldn't understand. Not words, just sounds. I felt dizzy for a moment and backed off. I needed to do something else. I tried lifting the mirror and taking it upstairs. I thought maybe I could store it in an attic crawl space. I reached the top of the stairs, but it got heavier halfway up. My foot slipped and I almost fell. I set it down on the landing. The glass rattled. Inside, I saw the figures move closer again. I dragged it into a spare room. I left it facing a bare wall and went back downstairs. I closed the door behind me. I sat in the living room, lights on, TV off. I could still hear faint whispers even through the floor. The house felt colder. My fingertips tingled. I walked in circles, thinking about breaking a window and tossing it out, but that seemed dangerous and stupid. I just moved in. I tried opening a beer to calm my nerves. The beer tasted flat. I tossed it. I decided to sit outside on the porch for a while. Outside, the air felt normal. I sat on the steps and looked at the quiet street. I stood up, walked around to check all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. After 20 minutes, I went back inside. The whispering continued, muffled by the floor and walls. I climbed the stairs, heart pounding. At the top, I hesitated. The door to the spare room was slightly open. I left it closed before. I approached it slowly. My mouth went dry again. I reached for the doorknob and listened. Inside, I heard soft scraping sounds. I pushed the door open. The mirror stood in the center of the room now, facing me. The sheet I used earlier was folded at its base, although I never brought that sheet upstairs. I stepped inside and circled the mirror. The images inside were dark and shifting. The figures stood at the glass, tapping. I looked closely. They seemed to lean their heads forward, pressing themselves against the glass from inside. I saw the surface bulge slightly inward like elastic. I gasped and stepped back. I ran out of the room and shut the door. The handle rattled a bit. I pressed my ear to the door. The whispers got louder. I ran downstairs and grabbed the hammer again. I rushed back up and swung the door open, hammer raised. I approached the mirror and struck it again. The metal bounced off. I yelled out loud, cursing, sweating. I dragged the mirror back down the hall, struggling under its weight. I pushed it into a closet and slammed the door shut. I held the door closed with my hands, breathing fast. The wood vibrated under my grip as something tapped from inside the closet. I shoved a heavy chair against the closet door. I backed away, watching the door, expecting it to burst open. It stayed closed. I stood there for a long time, listening to the muffled taps and whispers. My head hurt. My legs felt weak. I walked downstairs, leaving all the lights on. I sat on the couch and waited for morning. I didn't sleep. I listened to the noises drifting through the floors. I tried to focus on the sounds of distant traffic outside, anything normal. The whispering never completely stopped. I'm still here, writing this down in my head, trying to stay calm. The mirror is upstairs, locked in that closet. Every so often, I hear it rattle. I know if I open the door, I'll see that dark world and those shapes pressing against the glass. I can't break it, I can't throw it out. It returns inside every time I try. The voices keep coming, I don't know what they want. I'm just trying to keep it contained. I have no idea if they will ever stop. For now, I'm staying downstairs, listening, waiting, and hoping they never find a way through. I stood at the corner of that empty street and looked ahead. The street was quiet. It had a row of weak streetlights that flickered at regular intervals. There were no cars parked along the sidewalk. There were no people around. Everything felt cramped, even though the space was open. The buildings around me looked old. Their walls had patches of peeling paint. The pavement had cracks. The drains smelled of damp trash. The air carried a faint odor of stale water and decaying leaves. The night sky showed no stars. It felt like the power lines overhead were humming, but maybe that was just my ears adjusting to the silence. I swallowed once, trying to clear my throat. It was dry. My back felt stiff. I wondered if I should keep going down this street or try to find another route. But I didn't know the area well, and I needed to reach the main road. This street would save me a few blocks of walking. I decided to go ahead. As I took my first few steps, I heard the scuff of my shoes against the concrete. My footsteps echoed softly. The flickering lights were steady in their pattern. On for a few seconds, then a sudden dimming, then back again. Each cycle took maybe 2 or 3 breaths. I tried counting in my head, but I lost track. I moved at a slow pace. My shoulders felt tense. I noticed a sensation in my stomach, a slight tightness. I tried ignoring it. The closer I got to the first streetlight, the more I could see how weak the bulb was. It produced a thin cone of light that barely reached the center of the street. The edges of that light faded into darkness. On the left side, the building's wall formed a long canvas of dull concrete. On the right, I saw a fence made of metal bars, behind which there might have been a narrow alley or a vacant lot, but I couldn't see clearly. The fence rattled a bit when the wind picked up. I could feel the breeze on my face. It was cold and carried a hint of moisture. As I passed under that first streetlight, I saw something strange. On the wall to my left, a shadow stretched out. At first I thought it was just my silhouette, but the shape looked odd. The arms looked longer. The head seemed to tilt slowly. I stopped walking and stared. The flickering light played tricks on the outlines. I moved my hand up. My own shadow moved, but the shape on the wall didn't match my motion exactly. It hesitated, then caught up. I stepped 1 foot forward. The silhouette on the wall elongated along the cracked surface and seemed to wave one arm, as if raising it and lowering it at a lazy pace. I looked around. No one else was there. No other light source was obvious. I glanced behind me. The next street light down the road flickered in the same pattern. Everything looked empty and still. But when I looked back at the wall, the silhouette remained. It moved again, shifting its arms in a slow gesture that I couldn't interpret. I felt a chill at the back of my neck. I tried to breathe steadily. I didn't want to panic over a shadow. It was probably just a weird angle of the light, or maybe there was something behind me casting a strange shape. I turned around fully to check. I saw only the fence, the dark lot behind it, and the other side of the street. Nothing moved. I turned back to the wall. The silhouette still slid along it as if it was waiting for me to continue walking. I decided to move on. The tension in my shoulders grew as I walked further down the street. Each time I passed another light, I saw new shadows form on the walls. Some were shorter, some were elongated, some looked like they were bending their arms, some looked like they were turning their heads. My legs felt heavier. My heart beat faster. The silence around me made the hum of the bulbs louder in my ears. I clenched my jaw and tried to keep my breathing quiet. At one point, I stopped under a street lamp and stared directly at the wall. The shadows moved in a loop, raising and lowering their arms, twisting slightly as if stepping sideways. I lifted my right arm, holding it straight out. The silhouettes hesitated. Then, after a few flickers of the light, they repeated a similar motion. I stepped 2 paces backward. They eventually mirrored something like that movement too, but always after a delay or with some distortion. I spoke out loud, keeping my voice low. "Hello?" My voice sounded rough. I hadn't spoken for a while. No one answered. The shadows kept moving. I tried listening for any sound besides the electric buzz. I heard nothing. No distant footsteps, no rustling in the trash, no murmurs from any windows. The buildings had no lights on inside, no TVs, no radios, no music. Just me and the shifting silhouettes. I felt sweat forming under my jacket. I rubbed my palms together. They were damp. I tried blinking a few times, hoping the shapes would go away. They didn't. I decided to walk faster. I wanted to reach the end of this street. I estimated I had maybe 2 more streetlights to pass before I got to the main road. I could see a brighter glow at the far end, probably from the next intersection. If I could just get there, I'd be away from these strange lights and shadows. I started moving with longer strides. My footsteps sounded louder now. My breathing got heavier. The silhouettes stretched along the walls, following my pace. Each time the lights flickered, the shapes jerked and then continued their slow gestures. As I moved, I noticed that when I tried to ignore them, the silhouettes seemed to come closer, or at least it felt that way. If I looked straight ahead and tried not to pay attention, I caught glimpses of them drifting along the corners of my vision. I could see their arms lifting, then falling, their heads tilting. When I looked directly at them, they slowed down, as if pretending to be normal shadows. I clenched my teeth and pressed on. About halfway down the second stretch of the street, I tried another approach. I stopped and faced the wall. I spoke again. "What do you want?" My voice sounded strained. The silhouettes made no sound. They kept moving. One of them lifted a long arm shape and seemed to hold it there. I waited. The light flickered, and when it came back, the arm was lower. I stepped closer to the wall. The surface felt rough under my fingertips. I could smell dust and a faint odor of old paint. I touched it firmly, pressing my hand against it. It was cold and solid. I leaned in and tried to see if there was any texture that would cause such shadows. Maybe cracks, pipes, or wires. I saw some cracks and chipped paint, but nothing that explained those shapes. I stepped back again. My heart was pounding. I felt a dryness in my mouth. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I decided to just leave. I didn't see any reason to linger. I turned away from the wall and resumed my walk, a bit faster now. I passed under another streetlight. The flicker remained steady. The silhouettes followed, always on one wall or the other, always shifting. I kept glancing toward the end of the street. keeping my eyes on the brighter lights ahead. The next few steps were tense. My spine felt tight. My chest felt constricted. I inhaled through my nose, exhaled slowly through my mouth. I tried to focus on the physical details, my shoes hitting the ground, the loose pebble that I kicked by accident, the faint scrape of my jacket's zipper when I moved my arms, the distant sound of a car horn far away, probably on a bigger street. That horn reassured me that normal life existed outside this street. With each flicker of the lights, the silhouettes adjusted their positions. Sometimes they seemed to reach out. Sometimes they just swung their arms at the elbow. Other times they stood still. I ignored them as best I could. My legs felt a slight burn from the tension of trying not to run. I kept a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. When I finally reached the last streetlight before the intersection, I noticed the shadows looked a bit weaker. The brighter glow from the main road began to overpower the flickering bulbs behind me. The silhouettes seemed thinner, less defined. I could see them struggling to remain visible. Their edges wavered. One of them raised an arm again, but now it looked faint and broken up by patches of stronger light. I stopped for a moment and watched. They still moved, but less smoothly. The flickering pattern continued, but it felt less intense now. I glanced behind me down the street I had just crossed. It was a straight line of weak lights and peeling walls. From this vantage point, I could see the entire row of streetlights flickering in sequence. I could see several distorted silhouettes along the walls, each moving at a different angle. They all looked like faint outlines now. None of them made a sound. None of them approached me. I took a step toward the main road. The normal city lights were steady and strong. I could see a traffic light changing colors a block away. I could see a closed store with a bright security light above its door. I heard distant voices, maybe from people on a nearby avenue. The air smelled cleaner here, less damp and stale. I relaxed my shoulders a bit, feeling some of the tension slip away. Before I left that deserted street entirely, I turned back one last time. The silhouettes still moved in that slow pattern, but now it felt even more distant. They seemed to fade against the wall as I stood halfway between them and the main road. I didn't know what their purpose was. Maybe there was no purpose. They didn't speak. They didn't attack. They didn't vanish. They just kept doing their gestures. They kept responding to my presence, but never with anything I could understand. I shook my head and stepped onto the main road. My chest still felt tight. My palms still felt a bit sweaty. I cleared my throat and tried to breathe normally. Cars passed by in the distance. I heard a muffled sound from someone closing a door somewhere. I began walking toward my destination, staying close to the brighter lights. The feeling that I was leaving something unfinished lingered in my mind. It felt like I had walked out of a conversation right when someone was about to say something important. But I didn't know who they were or what they wanted to say. I kept walking, listening to my own footsteps on the sidewalk. My legs felt tired now that the tension had eased. I wiped my face with my sleeve, feeling a bit of sweat on my forehead. I tried to think if there was anything else I could have done. Maybe if I had waited longer or tried another question, I could have gotten something more. But I was too uneasy to stay there. That street was empty, and those silhouettes made no sense. I didn't want to go back. I wanted normal light, normal sounds, and normal people. I wanted to be away from those flickering patterns and those shifting shapes. As I kept walking, the memory of that street began to fade. The sound of distant traffic and the sight of stable, steady lights helped me calm down. I glanced at the storefronts. Most were closed, their metal shutters rolled down. A street cleaner pushed a cart a few blocks away. He didn't look in my direction. I passed under a strong halogen lamp that lit the sidewalk well. I could see my own shadow clearly, a simple shape following me closely. It didn't flicker. It didn't gesture. It just stayed there, a normal shadow. I reached the next intersection. Cars rolled by, their headlights cutting through the night. I turned right and headed toward my planned route. Behind me, that deserted street probably still flickered and those silhouettes probably still moved. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't turn back again. I felt relieved to be out of there, yet uneasy about what I left behind. But I had nothing else to do about it. I just kept walking forward, one step at a time, until it was just another strange memory in a long night. The first time I heard about the room, it was from a guy named Martin. We were sitting in the back of a dimly lit bar, nursing cheap whiskey, when he leaned in and said, "You ever hear about the silent room in that old monastery upstate?" I shook my head, and he told me the story with this half smirk, like he didn't believe it himself but wanted to see if I'd bite. "It's not just quiet in there," he said. "It's wrong. No echo, no sound, no nothing. People say it gets inside your head." I laughed it off, but it stuck with me. A few weeks later, I found myself driving upstate with nothing better to do. Curiosity, boredom, call it what you want. I just needed to see it for myself. The monastery was a shell of its former self. Cracked stone walls loomed over a yard of tangled weeds and broken statues. The front door was off its hinges, hanging at an angle like a jaw unhinged mid-scream. I parked my car on the gravel road outside and stepped into the courtyard. The air was still. No wind, no birds, nothing. Inside, the place smelled of mildew and old wood. My boots echoed as I walked across the tiled floor of what must have been a chapel. There were stained glass windows, most of them shattered, letting in shafts of dull gray light. The altar was bare, just a slab of stone with a deep crack running through the middle. I wandered through corridors lined with empty rooms. Dust coated everything, thick enough to write your name in. There were doors that wouldn't open, doors that led to nowhere, and then at the end of a hallway that seemed longer than it should have been, there it was, the door to the silent room. It didn't look special, just a plain wooden door with rusted hinges. But when I grabbed the handle, it felt colder than the air around it, like it had been sitting in a freezer. I pushed it open, and the hinge let out a long, drawn-out creak that felt too loud in the quiet of the building. Inside, it was dark. No windows, just a small bare room with walls and a ceiling that seemed too close together. I struck a match and lit the candle I'd brought with me. The flickering light illuminated the walls, and that's when I saw them. Dark stains covered the plaster, spread out in uneven patches. At first, I thought it was just water damage, but the longer I looked, the clearer they became. Faces, dozens of them. Some were small, no bigger than my hand. Others stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Their mouths were open in silent screams, their eyes wide and hollow. The candlelight made them seem like they were moving, shifting in slow, agonizing waves. I tried to back out of the room, but something stopped me. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I opened my mouth to call for help, to scream, but nothing came out. No sound, not even the scrape of my boots on the stone. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, but I couldn't hear it. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to feel it, to remind myself it was still there. The silence was so heavy it felt like it was pressing down on me, crushing me from the inside out. The candle flickered, and I swore the faces on the walls turned to look at me. I backed up against the door, my hands fumbling for the handle, but it wasn't there. The door was gone. Or maybe it had never been there in the first place. I started banging on the walls, pounding with both fists, but the room didn't give. The faces seemed to shift closer, their expressions twisting into something worse than pain. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt like it was full of concrete. The candle burned lower, the wax pooling around my fingers. The faces didn't stop moving. They twisted and writhed like they were alive, but I couldn't hear anything. No whispers, no moans, no screams, just silence. I don't know how long I was in there. Minutes? Hours? Time felt like it didn't work the same way inside that room. The air felt thicker with each passing second, like I was breathing in something more solid than air. My head pounded, my chest ached, but I couldn't do anything except stand there and watch the faces shift. When the candle finally burned out, I was left in total darkness. That's when I felt it, something brushing against my arm. I jerked away, but there was nowhere to go. The room felt smaller than before, like the walls were closing in. My hands hit the cold plaster and I could feel the outlines of the faces. They weren't just stains. They were raised, like they were carved into the wall. The one I touched was smooth, its lips open as if it were about to say something, but the silence swallowed everything. I don't remember finding the door. 1 second I was pressed against the wall, and the next I was stumbling out into the hallway. The air outside the room was damp and smelled like rot, but at least I could hear my own breathing again. It came in short, ragged gasps, my lungs burning with every inhale. The door swung shut behind me with a soft thud, and for a moment, I thought about running, just getting the hell out of there and never looking back. But my curiosity got the better of me. I turned around to look at the door one last time. It was just a door. Plain, wooden, unremarkable. The creak it made when I opened it was gone, replaced by silence. The hallway was quiet, but not like the room. I could hear my own breathing, the soft rustle of my jacket as I turned to leave. When I got back to my car, the world outside felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like the colors were a little duller, the sounds a little softer. Even the gravel under my boots didn't crunch the way it should have. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What was I supposed to say? That I walked into a room and lost my voice, my sense of time, maybe even my sanity. People would think I was crazy. Sometimes late at night I think I can still feel it. That silence. It's like a weight in my chest, a reminder that the room is still out there, waiting. And sometimes when the lights are off and the house is quiet, I think I see them. The faces, watching me from the corners of the room, their mouths open in silent screams. I wasn't supposed to be down there. The building supervisor had made that clear the first week I moved in. The basement's off limits, he'd said, his voice low and firm, like he was warning me about more than just safety hazards. But I couldn't resist. Something about his tone, the way he avoided looking directly at me when he said it, made it impossible not to wonder. The building itself was ancient, brick and mortar holding on like it had something to prove. I was broke and desperate, so when I found a place I could afford, I didn't ask too many questions. But that basement, it gnawed at me. So one night, after a couple of beers and too much time staring at the ceiling, I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the creaky stairs. The basement door wasn't even locked. That should have been my first warning. If they were so serious about keeping people out, why not lock it? But the latch clicked open easy, and the cold air hit me like a slap. It was dark, darker than I expected. My flashlight barely cut through it, the beam wobbling as I tried to steady my hand. The stairs groaned under me, loud and sharp in the silence. No hum of appliances, no distant drip of water. Just silence, like the whole space had been drained of sound. At the bottom, the smell hit me. Not rot, not damp, just nothing. No smell at all, like the air itself had been scrubbed clean. The room stretched wider than I thought it would. My flashlight caught glimpses of old wooden beams, piles of forgotten junk, and then the paintings. I almost missed them at first. They were tucked into an alcove along the far wall, lined up neatly, like someone had spent real time placing them there. The frames were ornate, gold and black, dust clinging to the grooves. The paintings inside were dark, muted colors, shadows swallowing most of the details. But the faces... I moved closer, the beam from my flashlight shaking a little. There were about 10 of them, all portraits, all staring straight ahead. Men, women, young, old. Each one had that classic oil painting look, high collars, stiff poses, solemn expressions. Except something was off. I didn't notice it at first, but the longer I looked, the more it stood out. Their mouths were too small. Their eyes were too wide. The proportions weren't right, like the artist had been guessing at what people looked like without ever having seen one. I shivered, but I told myself it was just the cold. I stepped closer, leaning in to get a better look at one, A man with a dark suit and slicked back hair. His lips were pursed, his eyes heavy-lidded. His expression was blank, but there was something about the way his face was angled that made me feel like he was sizing me up. The flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, tapping the side of it. The beam steadied, and for a second, I thought I saw his eyes twitch. I froze. It was subtle, barely there. Just the smallest flutter of his eyelids, like a slow, lazy blink. I stepped back, the beam swinging to another painting. A woman this time, her hair piled high, her dress all ruffles and lace. She had the same dead-eyed stare, but her lips, they were parted now. Just slightly. I could have sworn they were pressed together before. My chest tightened. The flashlight flickered again and I smacked it harder this time, my breath coming quicker. When the light came back, her lips had stretched into a grin. It wasn't a smile. It was too wide, the corners of her mouth curling up in a way that didn't make sense. Her teeth were small, sharp-looking, crammed together like they were fighting for space. I stumbled back, the flashlight beam swinging wildly across the other paintings. Every face had changed. The man with the slicked-back hair was grinning now, his lips pulled tight against his teeth. Another man, older with a white beard, had his eyes half closed, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening for something. A younger woman, her face pale and smooth, had her mouth open wide, her tongue dark and heavy in the center. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I backed away, trying to keep the flashlight steady, trying not to blink. The floorboards creaked under me, louder now, like they were straining against my weight. "Okay," I muttered, my voice shaky in the silence. "Okay, I'm done, I'm leaving." I turned, but the second I did, I felt it. A prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like tiny needles dragging against my skin. I stopped. The air behind me felt heavy, like it was pressing in. I didn't want to look. I told myself not to. But my head turned anyway, slow and stiff, like something was pulling it. The paintings were leaning forward. Not much, just enough that I could tell. The tops of the frames jutted out from the wall, the faces angled slightly downward, all of them looking directly at me. I could feel their eyes. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet. The flashlight flickered again, and this time, when it steadied, the faces were closer. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no scraping of frames against the wall. But they were closer, their features sharper now, more detailed. The woman with the high hair had her head cocked to the side, her grin impossibly wide. The man with the beard was baring his teeth, his gums black and swollen. I turned and bolted. The stairs felt farther away than they should have been, like the room had stretched somehow. My boots slammed against the floorboards, each step echoing like gunshots. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The prickling at the back of my neck was worse now, spreading across my shoulders, down my spine. My hands were slick with sweat, the flashlight slipping against my palm. When I hit the stairs, I nearly fell, grabbing the railing just in time to stop myself. I didn't stop running, though, practically throwing myself up the steps. The door was still open at the top, a slice of light cutting through the darkness. I reached it, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it. My chest was heaving, my throat tight. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, the cold from the basement still clinging to me. I didn't go back down there. I didn't even tell anyone what happened. But sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet and I'm lying in bed, I feel it, that prickling at the back of my neck. It started with a job listing. Caretaker for isolated property. Must stay on site. High pay. I needed the money, and the place was a 3-hour drive from anything resembling civilization. I figured it couldn't be worse than sleeping on a buddy's couch. The mansion wasn't exactly inviting when I pulled up late in the afternoon. It loomed at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by gnarled trees, and silence thick enough to make my ears ache. The house was all dark wood and narrow windows, like it had been built to keep the outside world away. A key was waiting in a rusted lockbox by the door, along with a single sheet of instructions. Keep the generator running, don't mess with the antiques, and avoid the hallway at the north wing after sundown. I tossed the paper aside with a laugh. Avoid a hallway? I was here to fix leaky pipes, not buy into ghost stories. The inside wasn't much better than the outside. Dust coated everything. The floorboards creaked with every step. The air felt heavy, damp, like the walls had soaked up years of mildew and misery. I found the north wing after dumping my bag in the first room with a decent bed. The hallway was easy to spot. It was narrower than the others, and even in the late afternoon light it seemed darker. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their faces so smudged and distorted I couldn't make out any features. At the end was a door. It looked ancient, made of dark wood and covered in faint, worn carvings. Symbols, maybe. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling, but I wasn't about to start freaking out over a hallway. I had bigger problems, like figuring out how to get the power back on before dark. By the time I got the generator going, it was already night. The mansion was quiet, except for the hum of the machinery outside and the occasional groan of the wind through the cracks in the walls. I was exhausted, but a nagging curiosity kept me from settling in. I grabbed a flashlight and went back to the north wing. The hallway was colder now. My skin prickled as I stepped into the shadows. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old coins. I walked slowly, shining the light across the faded portraits. The beam barely seemed to penetrate the dark. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The carvings seemed clearer now, but I still couldn't make sense of them. And then I heard it. Scratching. It was faint at first, like a mouse dragging its claws against wood. Then it got louder, more deliberate. It was coming from the other side of the door. My mouth went dry. The flashlight wavered in my hand. I leaned in, my ear just inches from the surface. The scratching stopped. I should have walked away. I knew it even then. But I grabbed the handle and twisted. It was ice cold. The door didn't budge. I pushed harder, and it gave way with a low groan. There was nothing. No room, no floor, just blackness. It wasn't just dark. It was like staring into a hole that shouldn't exist. My flashlight's beam just stopped, swallowed by the void. My heart hammered as I stepped back, but I couldn't look away. Then I saw them. Faces. Dozens of them. Pale, stretched thin like wet paper, with wide eyes that didn't blink. Their mouths moved, but there was no sound, only a low hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The scratching started again, louder now. Long, jagged fingers pressed against the edge of the void, dragging across nothing. They didn't break through, but they didn't stop. I slammed the door shut and ran. My legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop until I was in my room with the door locked. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I sat there gripping the flashlight, listening for any sign that something had followed me. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces. By morning, I convinced myself it had to be some kind of weird optical illusion, maybe a trick of the light or my brain messing with me. I forced myself to go back to the hallway. The door was shut. No scratches, no weird noises. I stood there for a long time, just staring, but I didn't touch it again. The day passed slowly. I busied myself with fixing a leaky sink and checking the old plumbing. Anything to keep from thinking about the hallway. But when night came, the scratching started again. Faint at first, then louder. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but I couldn't help it. This time I didn't open the door. I just stood in the hallway listening. The scratching stopped, replaced by a whisper. It wasn't words exactly, just a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. My chest felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I stumbled back to my room, but the whisper followed me. It was faint, just under the edge of hearing, like it was coming from inside my own head. I stuffed earbuds in and blasted music until my ears ached, but it didn't help. By the third night, I was a wreck. The whisper had turned into a constant drone, and the scratching felt like it was echoing through the entire house. I tried calling the number from the job listing, but the line was dead. I decided I was done. I packed my bag and headed for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The lock turned, but the door wouldn't budge. I tried the windows. Same thing. It was like the house had sealed itself shut. I went back to the north wing. The hallway was darker than ever, the air freezing cold. The door was open, just a crack. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I crept closer, my stomach twisting with every step. The void was still there, and the faces were closer now. I could see their eyes moving, following me. The whisper was louder, almost a chant. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the flashlight. It rolled to the edge of the blackness and stopped. I should have left it, but I didn't. I reached down, and as soon as my fingers touched the light, something moved. One of the faces surged forward, its mouth stretching open wider than it should have been. A hand shot out, clawed and skeletal, grabbing for me. I fell back, scrambling to my feet and slamming the door shut. The whisper stopped. The scratching stopped. But the door didn't lock. I spent the rest of the night in the corner of my room, gripping a broken chair leg like it would do anything if one of those things got through. By morning, I was done playing around. I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox and went back to the hallway. The door was still closed, but I could hear the whisper, faint but insistent. I swung the hammer at the wood as hard as I could. The carving splintered, but the door didn't break. I kept swinging, sweat pouring down my face, my arms burning. Finally, the door cracked open and everything went silent. No whispers, no scratching, just silence so deep it made my ears ring. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing happened. When I stepped back, the door creaked shut on its own. The next morning, the front door opened without a problem. I didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. I don't know what was behind that door, and I don't care. I still hear the whisper sometimes late at night. It's faint, almost like my ears are playing tricks on me. But I never go near closed doors after dark. Not anymore. It started as a typical evening. Work had dragged on longer than usual, and I was dead set on getting home as quickly as possible. I remember glancing at the clock on my dashboard, 6:47 p.m. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, and a faint orange glow stretched across the sky. My usual route home would take another 25 minutes, but then I spotted the dirt road to my right, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I'd passed it a dozen times, but never took it. It was one of those things people talked about but never really used. A shortcut, they said. Shaves off 10, maybe 15 minutes. That was enough for me. I flicked my blinker, turned onto the path, and immediately felt the crunch of gravel under my tires. The road was narrow with trees lining both sides, their branches almost forming a tunnel. I remember thinking how quiet it got as soon as I left the main road. No engines, no honking. Just the faint hum of my car and the occasional crunch of twigs beneath the tires. At first it felt fine, peaceful even. The air smelled damp, like the forest had soaked up the day's heat and was now cooling off. But then I noticed something odd, something that didn't feel right. The trees seemed closer, not in a supernatural way, just in a way that made the road feel tighter, more confined. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. A few minutes in, the tension started. It wasn't anything big at first, just a flicker of movement to my left. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something, a shadow slipping between the trees. I jerked my head to look, but there was nothing there, just darkness and the faint outlines of trunks and branches. I shrugged, letting out a short laugh at myself. "Relax," I muttered. "It's just trees, probably a deer or something." The road started to get rougher. Potholes appeared more frequently, and my car jolted every time I hit one. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The headlights barely seemed to cut through the growing darkness. I could feel my pulse in my temples now, steady but noticeable. I reached over to turn the volume up on the radio, hoping some noise would break the silence, but all I got was static. No big deal, I thought. I'll be out of here soon. And then I heard it, a dull thump from behind me. My stomach dropped. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my hands freeze on the wheel. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but all I could see was darkness. Probably a branch, I told myself, but my voice sounded shaky, even to me. I kept driving, telling myself it didn't matter, but the feeling didn't go away. About 2 minutes later, it happened again. Thump. Louder this time, like something hitting the trunk. My hands were slick on the steering wheel now. I glanced at the mirror again, but it was useless. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but behind me there was nothing but black. Okay, I said out loud, trying to keep my voice steady. Just keep moving. I pressed the gas pedal a little harder. The car bumped and rattled as the road got worse. The trees seemed thicker now, their branches reaching out like they were trying to block my way. My breathing got heavier. I couldn't help it. Every time I thought I saw something moving out there, my heart felt like it skipped a beat. Then, just when I thought I'd shaken it off, bang! Something hit the passenger side door. Hard. I jumped so bad my foot slipped off the gas for a second. The car slowed, but I quickly pressed down again, hard. What the hell was that? I shouted, not expecting an answer. My heart was racing now, pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't dare stop. I didn't even look at the door. I kept my eyes on the road, knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. The logical part of my brain screamed at me. A rock, a branch, anything but, don't think about it, just drive. But the noises didn't stop. There was another thump, this time on the roof, followed by a scraping sound that made my skin crawl. It sounded like nails dragging across metal. My hands were trembling now. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Wind. Maybe a branch fell. Anything to keep from losing it completely. And then I saw it, up ahead in the middle of the road. A figure, just standing there, barely lit by my headlights. It didn't move, didn't wave, didn't signal for help. Just stood there, motionless. I hit the brakes hard, the car skidding to a stop. My chest heaved as I stared at the figure. It looked like a man, but I couldn't make out any details. The shadows from the trees played tricks on my eyes, making him seem blurry, like he was flickering in and out of focus. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" No response. The figure didn't move. My throat was dry, and my palms were sweating so much I could barely grip the wheel. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the car around, but the road was too narrow. I'd have to reverse, and I didn't like the idea of not being able to see behind me. "Move!" I shouted again, slamming my hand on the horn. The sound echoed through the trees, but the figure didn't flinch. It was like he, or it, didn't even hear me. That's when I noticed the shadows again. Not just the one in front of me, but others, moving between the trees. Flickers of black just outside the reach of my headlights. My chest tightened. They were circling me. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. My fingers were shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. Screw it. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The car lurched forward, and for a split second, I thought I saw the figure move. Just a slight twitch, like it was turning its head to watch me. My stomach churned, but I didn't stop. The car bounced and jolted as I sped down the road, the branches on either side scraping against the windows like claws. The noises didn't stop. I could hear them now. Soft, deliberate thuds on the roof, the doors, even the trunk. Like something or someone was climbing on the car. I clenched my teeth, refusing to look in the mirror. I couldn't. I just had to get out of there. Finally, I saw it. The edge of the woods. The trees thinned out, and I could see the faint glow of streetlights in the distance. Relief flooded me. I pressed the gas even harder, the engine roaring as I raced toward the light. As soon as I hit the main road, the noises stopped. Just like that. No thumps, no scraping, no movement. I drove for a few more minutes before pulling over, my hands trembling as I turned off the engine. My chest heaved as I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to calm down. After a few minutes, I forced myself to get out of the car. My legs felt like jelly as I walked around, checking the doors, the roof, the trunk. Nothing. No scratches, no dents, no signs of anything hitting the car. But when I opened the passenger door, my blood ran cold. There, on the seat, was a handprint. Smudged, dark, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass from the inside. I slammed the door shut, jumped back into the driver's seat, and floored it all the way home. I didn't take that shortcut again. I never will. I remember that night starting out normal. I had left a friend's place later than usual. I was on my way home after a long day. It must have been close to midnight. The 2-lane road stretched ahead in near total darkness. There were no streetlights. The sky had no moon. I'd been driving for at least an hour without seeing another car. I felt the need to get home fast, but I was calm enough. I had the radio off. The inside of my car was quiet except for a slight hum from the engine and the tires rolling over the pavement. I glanced at my rearview mirror once because I thought I caught something in my peripheral vision. At first, I saw nothing but darkness behind me. Then I saw 2 small lights pop up in the distance. Headlights. Another driver. It surprised me. I had not expected any company out here. I watched the lights for a second before returning my eyes to the road. The lines on the asphalt were faint. I tried to keep the car steady. The other vehicle's lights were far behind, but still there. After a minute or so, I looked again. The headlights were closer than before, approaching steadily. The road ahead curved gently, and I slowed a bit because I couldn't see very far. The other car closed the gap. It felt too fast. I checked my speedometer. I was going a bit under the limit. I tapped the accelerator. My car picked up speed. The headlights behind matched my pace. No big deal, I thought at first. Maybe it was another driver heading home just like me. But then I noticed that the car behind lined up exactly with my lane changes. When I drifted right a bit to avoid a pothole, the headlights behind did the same. When I returned to center, they followed. It looked odd. I switched to the right lane. The headlights moved behind me, staying in line. I switched back to the left lane. They followed again. I frowned. There were no other cars around. There were no intersections, no exits, not for a few miles at least. I knew this stretch of road. The next gas station was ahead, but still a good distance away. Everything else was just empty fields and patches of trees on either side. The roadside had tall grass and no fences. I saw nothing else out there. My car's headlights illuminated maybe 30 feet ahead. Beyond that was just darkness. The rearview mirror showed only those 2 glaring lights behind me. I tried slowing down to let the other car pass. I pressed the brake pedal gently. My speed dropped. The headlights dropped too. The other car slowed at the exact same time. It stayed behind me, never pulling up beside me, never backing off completely. After a few seconds, I pressed the gas again, trying to regain my normal speed. The other car followed. I changed lanes again. It followed. I felt a slight warmth under my arms. My hands were sticky on the steering wheel. I turned off the AC and turned it back on, hoping that would help. It did not. My breathing felt shallow. My shoulders tensed. I tried speeding up. I pressed down harder on the gas pedal. My car responded with a slight roar and my speedometer climbed. I kept my eyes on the mirror for a moment. The headlights behind grew brighter as the other driver also accelerated. They stuck right behind me, maybe only 2 car lengths now. I couldn't make out the shape of their car, only those lights now glaring bright. They might have had their high beams on. I squinted. The reflection in my mirror was too bright. I flipped the mirror's angle to reduce the glare. It helped a little, but I could still see the lights behind. I felt my jaw clench tight. My heart thumped harder. I considered pulling over, but we were on a stretch with no shoulder. There was only a narrow strip of rough gravel at the edge. Stopping there seemed risky. Besides, I didn't know what this person wanted. I noticed my grip on the wheel got tighter. I tried to relax my fingers, but they stayed tense. I kept my foot on the gas. The car behind me stayed close. When I eased off to try a different speed, the other car matched every move. I tried something else. I signaled to the right, hoping the driver might take a hint and pass on the left. I slowed down. They slowed. They never came around me. They just stayed directly behind, tailgating now so close that I could feel a slight pressure in my chest. My breathing got heavier. My ears felt hot. My back felt damp against the seat. I leaned forward to check the road ahead, still empty, still dark. I tapped my steering wheel twice with my finger. My leg muscles were stiff. I decided to speed up again to see if maybe I could lose them. I pressed the gas hard. The engine growled. My car surged forward. For a second I thought I gained some ground, but then the headlights grew even brighter, as if the other car had found a way to push even closer. My speedometer needle climbed above the limit. I felt my heart beating in my neck. The other car stayed right on me, not backing off by an inch. I could hear my own breathing now, fast and shallow. I glanced at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was fine. The temperature gauge was normal. The radio was off. My phone lay on the passenger seat. I picked it up with one hand, holding the wheel with the other. I kept my eyes on the road, but I tried to unlock my phone. My thumb pressed the screen. Nothing. I tried again. It unlocked. I glanced down for a fraction of a second to check if I had a signal. The phone's screen showed one bar, maybe. I tried to place a call, but I wasn't sure who to call. Maybe 911. I tried 911. I held the phone to my ear. It rang once, then nothing. The call didn't go through. I tried again. Still nothing. No stable signal. I placed the phone back down, keeping my eyes mostly forward. I didn't want to crash. The dark road had no lights. I needed to focus. The road began to curve slightly. I slowed to handle the curve. The other car tapped my rear bumper. I felt a slight jolt, a small impact from behind. I gasped and jerked the wheel. My car wobbled. I regained control and steadied it. The bumper tap wasn't strong enough to push me off the road, but it was enough to send a clear message. Whoever was behind me meant to mess with me. They were not just messing around at a distance. They were making direct contact. I muttered a few curses under my breath. My forehead was damp. I tasted a dryness in my mouth. My teeth clenched. I checked the mirror again. The lights behind were so bright I could almost feel the heat from them. I tried to see beyond them to identify the car. I saw no brand, no model, no color, just two white points of light. The glare was too strong to see the shape. I felt my heart pounding. My foot pressed the gas, but I realized going faster was not helping. The other driver had no trouble keeping up. I considered slamming the brakes, but that seemed like a bad idea. If I hit the brakes hard, they might ram me at full speed. I didn't want that. I just needed to get away, maybe find a place with other people. I tried to recall the last time I passed anything. I remembered a gas station sign about 10 miles back, saying the next station was ahead in about 5 or 6 miles. I was not sure how far I had gone since then. Maybe it was still a few miles away. I hoped it was closer than that. I kept one hand tight on the wheel, the other wiping sweat from my palm onto my pants. I checked the speed again. I was going a bit too fast for comfort. The lines on the road zipped by. The car behind matched every move. I flicked my turn signal on and off again, just a nervous habit. I pressed my lips together. I tried to think if there was a way to confuse them. Maybe if I drifted onto the shoulder and kicked up some dust? I didn't know if that would help. The shoulder looked narrow and rough. I didn't want to risk a flat tire or losing control. The road continued forward. No intersections. No turns, just blackness and my headlights cutting through it. The car behind stayed close. The glare of its lights covered my mirrors. I couldn't see the stars, couldn't see anything. I felt isolated and trapped. My neck was stiff, my shoulders ached. I blinked several times to keep my eyes focused. Then I saw something ahead. At first it was just a faint glow in the distance, a hint of artificial light against the darkness. As I got closer, I realized it was a gas station. I recognized the shape of the sign and the soft, yellowish lights that surrounded the pumps. It looked small, probably one of those stations that stay open all night. There might be an attendant or maybe just self-service pumps. Either way, it was a place with lights and maybe a camera or two. It meant I would not be alone out there. I pressed the gas a little more, hoping to reach that station quickly. The other car was still on my tail. I checked the gap. Maybe a car length. It was dangerously close. I gritted my teeth and tried to keep the wheel steady. My headlights lit the outline of the gas station sign. I could see a small building next to the pumps, a single car parked near the side. The light was bright enough to show the pavement clearly. I wanted to pull in there, maybe get out of the car, maybe just be around some lights and see if this psycho behind me would back off. I kept my foot down, maintaining speed. As I got close, I flicked my blinker to the right lane. I started to move over. The car behind followed, still close. I was ready to brake and turn into the gas station entrance. My heart hammered against my chest. My mouth felt dry. My arms felt shaky. Just as I approached the turn for the station, I glanced in the mirror one last time. The headlights behind me were gone. Just like that, they disappeared. I looked back over my shoulder. Nothing was there. The road behind me was empty. I pressed the brake slowly, checking my mirrors again and again. No lights, no car, nothing. The darkness behind me was complete. I turned into the gas station lot, my tires crunching over a slightly rough patch near the entrance. I parked under the bright lights, turned off the engine and sat there breathing hard. My shirt stuck to my back. My heart pounded inside my chest. I rubbed my face with both hands. I looked around. The gas station had a small store inside with a door made of glass and a few shelves visible. A dim light flickered inside. There was no sign of anyone behind me. No headlights on the road. No engine sound. Nothing. I stepped out of my car, feeling the cool night air on my face. My legs were stiff. I walked around to the back of my car to check if there was any damage. I couldn't see much, but I ran my hand over the bumper. It felt normal. Maybe a slight scuff, but nothing major. I listened for any distant engine noise. I heard only the soft hum of the station's lights. Maybe some insects near the grassy edge. I looked up and down the road. Nothing was moving. The station's sign buzzed quietly. I walked toward the store and tried the door. It was locked. The lights were on inside, but maybe there was no one there at the moment. I knocked on the glass once. No response. I peered inside. I saw a counter with a register, some snacks on shelves, and a coffee machine. I waited for a minute, just listening. I still heard nothing from the road. After waiting, I went back to my car. I pulled out my phone and checked for service again. Now I had a signal. I could see a couple of bars. I considered calling someone, maybe a friend, but I didn't know what to say. I had no license plate, no description of the car that followed me, just headlights. I wondered if I should call the police. I decided to wait and see if the car appeared again. I leaned against my car, arms crossed, eyes on the empty road. The darkness around the gas station was total beyond the circle of light. The road stretched off into that darkness. A few trees at the edge of the property swayed slightly in a weak breeze. I could feel my heartbeat slowing down now that I was out of the car. My neck still felt stiff. I rolled my shoulders to ease the tension. My breathing settled. My mouth still felt dry, so I sipped from a water bottle I had in the car. The water was warm, but it helped. I walked around the small lot. The pumps were old but functional. One pump had a handwritten, "out of order" sign taped to it. The other pump looked fine. I tried to see if the store had any posted hours. I spotted a small sign near the door. Open 24 hours. But no one answered my knock. Maybe the attendant was in the back. I thought about getting back in the car and continuing my drive. The idea made me nervous. I pictured those headlights returning the moment I got onto the empty road again. My stomach felt tight. I took a few deep breaths. I reasoned that I needed to get home. I couldn't stay at this station forever. but maybe I could wait a bit longer. If that car had been messing with me, maybe they were waiting somewhere down the road. But if they were gone, they would not stick around this late. I decided to wait another 10 minutes. I checked my phone again. The time was later than I thought. I had spent more time out here than expected. No messages, no missed calls. The quiet felt strange. There was a slight buzzing in my ears from the silence. I opened my car door and turned on the interior light. The small circle of light felt safe. I stood there and scanned the road one last time. Nothing. No headlights. No movement. I climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine started smoothly. I adjusted my seatbelt. I put my phone in the cup holder. I flicked on my headlights again, illuminating the gas station lot and the road ahead. It looked normal. Just an empty rural highway at night. I was more alert now. My senses felt sharper. My arms still felt tense, but my breathing was steady. I pulled out of the station slowly, looking both ways. The road was empty. I turned onto the asphalt, keeping my speed low. I watched my mirrors. Nothing behind me. The rearview mirror showed only darkness. I drove for a minute, then two, checking frequently. Still nothing. Just the faint outlines of fields and trees. The tension began to fade slightly. I listened to my engine's steady hum and the sound of tires on asphalt. I tried to focus on reaching home. It was still a drive away, but at least now I had some light from the station behind me. The memory of the other car was fresh in my mind. I could almost feel that bumper tap again. My heartbeat picked up when I thought about it, but I saw no headlights. I was alone on the road. I kept driving, not too fast, checking my mirrors again and again. Nothing. The road remained empty. After a while, I relaxed my shoulders and loosened my grip on the wheel. My palms were dry now. My clothes still felt a bit damp from sweat, but the cool air from the vents helped. I took a few sips of water from the bottle. The air outside smelled like nothing, just neutral, cool night air coming through the vents. I never saw that car again. Whoever it was, whatever they wanted, they were gone. If not for the tightness in my muscles and the slight scuff I thought I felt on my bumper, I might have doubted it happened. But I knew it did. I felt the impact. I saw the lights. I felt the fear. There was no reason to doubt that. It happened, and now it was over. I kept driving toward home. The rest of the road ahead was just dark and empty. No other cars appeared. No other strange lights followed me. Eventually, I reached more familiar territory with a few houses, some streetlights, and a more comfortable setting. But that memory of those headlights sticking to me on that empty stretch would stay in my mind. I could still picture them in my mirror, glaring and matching every move, right until the moment they vanished near that gas station. I remember it clearly. By the time I finally got home, it was very late. I parked in my usual spot and got out. The air felt calmer here. Street lights lit the curb. A neighbor's porch light was on. I stood there for a moment, still feeling some tension in my legs and shoulders. I looked around. Everything was quiet and normal. I locked my car and went inside, glad to be off the road and away from that strange encounter. No children, no deaths, no crashes, just a tense drive that ended as abruptly as it began. That was it. I still do not know who they were or why they followed me, but I know how it felt. It felt real and threatening, and I'm just glad it ended. I still remember that night. It happened during my first week working at that old farm. The farmer had gone into town before sunset, and I stayed behind in the barn to finish some chores. He said he might not be back until late. He told me to lock up and leave whenever I was done. I was new and wanted to make a good impression, so I decided to finish everything he had asked me to do. I stayed longer than I should have. It was quiet after he left, at least at first. The barn was dim, lit by a single overhead bulb that the farmer had set up so I could see what I was doing. There were a few loose boards along the barn walls. They creaked sometimes when the wind blew. I tried to ignore it. I had a few tasks left. Stacking hay bales in a corner, checking the feed bins, putting tools back on their proper hooks. My back was sore from a full day of work, and my hands smelled like old rope and straw. I just wanted to get done and go home. I remember lifting a bale of hay and hearing something outside. It sounded like slow, dragging footsteps. At first, I thought maybe the farmer came back early. I stopped what I was doing and listened. I didn't hear a door open or a truck engine. Just something like a heavy boot scraping along the dirt. It moved around the side of the barn, then went quiet. I called out, "Hello?" I said it loud enough that if anyone was out there, they would answer. But nobody spoke. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a stray animal. The area around the barn had loose dirt and patches of grass, and sometimes you'd get a dog wandering through. I got back to work. After a few minutes, I heard it again. A slow step, then a pause, then another. It sounded like it was circling the barn. I turned off my music on my phone and listened more closely. The barn door was closed, but not locked. There was a padlock, but I hadn't used it yet because I planned on leaving soon. I walked to the door and put my ear against it. I heard something like a whisper, but I couldn't catch any words. It was a muffled sound, low and quiet, like someone trying not to be heard. I held my breath and stood there for a moment, waiting. My heart was beating faster. I felt a bit stupid for getting nervous over a noise. I grabbed a pitchfork and stepped back. I wasn't planning on fighting anyone, but I didn't like standing there unarmed. I looked around the barn. Everything seemed normal at first. Then I noticed a shovel on the floor that I was sure I had hung up earlier. I remembered placing it on a hook. Now it rested against a post near the door. My stomach tightened. I walked over and put it back on the hook. I tried to think logically. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I left it there. I kept telling myself that. I went back to my work. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't ignore the sounds outside. The steps came and went. Sometimes I heard them at the back of the barn, sometimes near the sides. They didn't move fast. They dragged, stopped, and then started again. I considered calling the farmer, but I felt silly. He told me he would be late, so maybe it was just him messing around. But why would he do that? He never seemed like the joking type. I heard a soft thud behind me. I spun around. A rake that had been leaning against the wall fell over. I walked over and stood it up. I checked all the tools, making sure they were secure. I had a weird feeling that I wasn't alone. I thought maybe there was someone on the roof or in the loft. I climbed the ladder to the loft and looked around with a flashlight. It was empty except for old boxes and loose straw. No animals, no people. I climbed down and stood in the middle of the barn. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I looked at my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual out here. The wind outside picked up a bit and I heard the old boards groan. The barn smelled like dust and hay. I was sweating, even though it wasn't hot. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to seem lazy. I had only one chore left, sorting a small pile of feed bags and stacking them by the door. I started organizing them. That's when I heard the whispering again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like 2 or 3 voices speaking quietly, moving around the outside of the barn. I couldn't understand the words. I dropped a bag of feed and stood still. The voices stopped. I walked toward the side of the barn and pressed my ear against the wall. I heard a faint scraping sound. I hit the wall with my palm and yelled, "Who's there?" I expected a quick answer, maybe laughter, or someone saying it's just a prank. Nothing. Total silence. I stepped away from the wall and looked at the tools again. The shovel was on the floor again. My chest tightened. I grabbed it and held it in my hands this time. I wasn't going to keep putting it back like some fool. I decided I needed to look outside. I couldn't just stand in there and imagine things. I walked to the door slowly. I took a deep breath and pulled it open. The outside light had a motion sensor. It was dark at first, but as soon as I stepped out, it flickered on and off a couple of times, then stayed dim. I stood on the threshold and looked around. I saw dusty ground, some old wood planks stacked by the fence, and nothing else. No people, no animals, nothing out of place. I walked a few steps forward. The ground was soft from a recent rain, and I saw footprints. They were human, I think, or at least they looked like boot prints, but they made no sense. They circled around the barn in uneven loops. They didn't lead anywhere, just stopped abruptly near the back. I followed one set of prints to where they ended. It looked like someone had been walking around and then vanished. I knelt down and touched the ground. It felt damp and loose. No sign of dragging, no sign of a jump or anything. Just footprints that stopped. I stood up and looked around, keeping the shovel in my hand. My mouth felt dry. The night air was still. I heard the faint hum of distant traffic on the highway. I thought about calling out again, but I didn't see the point. Whoever was out here didn't want to answer. I stepped back inside the barn. The light outside flickered again and went out. Inside, I closed the door and slid the latch. I checked it twice to make sure it was secure. I turned around and saw the pitchfork had moved from its corner to the center of the barn floor. It lay there, tines facing me. I know I didn't put it there. I felt my scalp tighten and a wave of heat pass through my face. I rushed over and picked it up, then threw it to the side and stepped back. I tried to control my breathing. I didn't know what to do. I considered leaving, but I felt trapped. The driveway was long and dark. My car was parked by the main house, which was a couple of 100 yards away. I didn't have the keys on me. They were in my jacket, which I had left hanging near the barn door. I grabbed my jacket and fished out the keys. I thought maybe I would just drive to town and find the farmer, tell him what happened. But then I realized I should at least call him first. I walked outside again and tried to get a signal. Nothing. Just the same dead spot. I stared at the empty fields. The moon was out, but there were thin clouds, and the light was weak. I kept looking at the ground, searching for any sign of movement. The footprints I saw were still there, just as before, going nowhere. I walked around the barn, holding my phone up, hoping to catch a signal. I heard a low scraping sound behind me. I turned and saw nothing. I looked at the barn's roof. Nothing there. The wind picked up a bit and the boards groaned again. The sound made me clench my teeth. I went back inside and closed the door again. I decided to wait it out. Maybe it was just some local kids messing with me. But I didn't hear any laughter or running footsteps. It was too quiet. The barn smelled stale now, like old sweat and dirt. I stayed near the door, leaning against it, listening. After a few minutes, I heard that whispering again. It was softer now, as if whoever it was had backed away. It circled the barn once more, slow and deliberate. I imagined someone walking close, dragging their feet, whispering to themselves. But I didn't see anyone through the cracks. I tapped on the door and waited. No response. I picked up a hammer from a toolbox and walked around inside, making sure nothing else had moved. I found the rake leaning against a different wall than where I put it earlier. I saw a coil of rope unrolled on the floor. I kept picking things up and putting them back, afraid that if I looked away, they would move again. My stomach growled, and I realized it was past my usual dinner time. I thought about leaving the barn and making a run for the house. It wasn't far, but in the dark and with whoever or whatever was out there, I didn't feel safe. The house was locked anyway. The farmer had the keys. I only had my car keys, and the car was parked by the house. I would have to run across open ground to reach it. The idea made my heart pound. I tried yelling one more time, "If you're out there, knock it off." My voice echoed inside the barn. Outside, nothing but silence. I looked through the small window near the workbench. I saw the sensor light outside flicker again. Something must have moved. I saw a shadow pass by the window. A quick, dark shape, low to the ground. I backed away, holding the hammer tightly. I pressed my back against a stack of hay bales and listened. The whispering started again, a bit louder. It sounded like a low conversation right outside the wall. The words were too quiet to understand. I waited, hoping they would leave. Instead, I heard the boards creak as if weight pressed against them from outside. I thought I saw dust fall from the rafters. I moved to the center of the barn, keeping all walls in my line of sight. After a few minutes, the sounds began to fade. The footsteps became less frequent. The whispering turned into soft rustling. I heard a gentle tapping, like someone scratching on the outside wall. Then even that stopped. The silence lasted for a long time. I slowly let out a breath. I told myself it might be over. I decided I needed to leave before it started again. I unlatched the door and stepped outside. The sensor light struggled to stay on, flickering. I looked around. I didn't see anyone, but I still saw those odd footprints. I followed them a bit farther this time, circling the barn. They looped around, then ended about 10 feet from the far side. The ground beyond was untouched, smooth. There was no fence there, no ditch, nothing. Just empty dirt and darkness. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The light outside flickered one last time, then went out. I stood in the dark, listening to my own breathing. I walked toward the main house, keeping my footsteps quiet. I passed through a patch of tall grass and reached my car. I got inside and locked the doors. I started the engine, turned on the headlights, and aimed them at the barn. Nothing moved. Just that old wooden structure. The tools were inside. I pictured them scattered around, but I knew they were inside, not out here. No one was visible. The headlights lit up a piece of fence, some old barrels, and a few small trees. Everything looked normal except for that uneasy feeling in my chest. I sat there for a while, engine running, doors locked, headlights shining. I waited to see if anyone would show up. Nobody did. Eventually, I turned the car around and started down the driveway. I didn't see any movement in my rearview mirror. The night was still. I drove until I reached a spot with cell service and called the farmer. He didn't pick up, probably still in town. I left a message saying something strange happened at the barn. I told him I locked up and left. I didn't go into detail on the voicemail. I went home and tried to sleep. The next morning, I came back to the farm early. I told the farmer what happened. He looked confused and said he never came back that night. He said no one else should have been on the property. We walked to the barn and looked around. The footprints were gone, the ground already dried and smoothed out by morning breeze. Inside, the tools were mostly where they belonged. Only the rope looked like it had been messed with, lying a bit looser than usual. The farmer shrugged it off, said maybe I was tired, maybe I heard animals. I didn't argue. I knew what I heard. I knew what I saw. I kept working there for a while, but I never stayed that late again. When the farmer went to town, I always finished early and locked up before dark. I never heard those whispers again, and I never saw footprints that led nowhere. But I remember that night clearly, and I don't like to think about it too much. It still makes my neck stiffen and my stomach tense up. I don't know who was out there, or what they wanted, or how they managed to vanish without a trace. I just know I heard them, I saw those prints, and I saw tools move by themselves. Nothing else explains it. I just don't talk about it much anymore. It doesn't help to think about it. I did my job, I locked up, I left. That's all. I remember the exact moment I decided to take that damn shortcut. It was late afternoon and the sun was dropping behind the trees. The regular road out of town was completely jammed. It was me, Danny, and Chris in my old sedan. We were on a spur-of-the-moment trip to the coast, nothing planned. Just me behind the wheel, Danny riding shotgun, Chris in the back. We were in good spirits, but I was tired of sitting in traffic, watching brake lights flash and feeling sweat collect under my shirt. The navigation app showed a quiet road running parallel through some backwoods area. It looked empty. I suggested it. Danny shrugged. Chris nodded, so I turned off without much thought. We had no clue what we'd run into down that lonely route. About 20 minutes later, we were on this 2-lane strip of cracked asphalt. Dense trees pressed in on both sides, their shadows stretching across the pavement. There weren't any houses or gas stations. There was just us and the crunch of gravel under the tires. We kept going, hoping to reach another main road soon. Danny fiddled with the radio, got static, cursed under his breath, and gave up. Chris stared out the window, tapping his foot. I just kept driving. The car's headlights were on low beam. The engine's hum was steady. The air inside smelled faintly of sweat and old upholstery. After a while, we spotted someone in front of us, standing near the edge of the road. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker. The figure wore a hooded jacket. It looked dirty and loose, maybe torn in places. The light was getting weaker, but I could see the person raising an arm, slowly waving. I slowed down, unsure if we should stop. Danny leaned forward, squinting. Chris said nothing at first. The figure didn't move away. It just kept that arm raised, as if asking for help. The person's posture looked odd, stiff and slightly tilted. The hood covered the face, so I couldn't see any features. The clothing looked worn out with frayed edges. It gave off a strange impression, something not right. I braked and rolled the window down a bit. The air outside was cooler. I could smell damp leaves and earth. The figure stood maybe a few car lengths ahead. None of us called out. We just looked. Then Chris said, "We should see what's going on. Maybe they need help." Danny said it was a bad idea. I didn't know what to say. The person just stood there, waiting. I was curious, and I felt a bit uneasy. Maybe it was the silence or the way the figure's head stayed bowed, never showing a face. We didn't hear any cries for help, just the distant rustle of leaves. Chris unbuckled his seatbelt, pushed the door open, and stepped out before I could stop him. He was always the one to jump into action. He shouted, "Hey, you okay?" He walked a few steps toward the figure. I leaned forward, trying to keep my eyes on both Chris and this stranger. Danny stayed quiet, holding the dashboard. My heart was beating faster than normal. I could feel a dull pressure in my chest and a slight shake in my hands. I tapped the steering wheel. I watched Chris approach, then I blinked. The figure was gone. Just like that. One moment it was there, next moment it wasn't. Chris stopped and looked around. I saw him turn in a full circle, his hands lifted as if to say, "Where'd they go?" There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling of branches, just emptiness. I leaned my head out the window and called, "Chris, what the hell?" He looked back at me wide-eyed, shaking his head. He walked forward a bit more, bent down, and then stood straight again. Chris returned, stepping around to the front of the car. Then he stopped and stared at the ground. I followed his gaze through the windshield. There were footprints in the soft dirt beside the road, right where the figure had been. They were small and uneven, leading around the side of the car. I watched Chris's eyes track something. He looked confused, then concerned. He moved toward the passenger side, then stopped. He stood there, arms stiff at his sides, looking down at the ground. Inside the car, Danny said, "What the hell's going on?" I didn't answer. I craned my neck, trying to see what Chris was doing. I tapped the horn lightly, a small beep. "Chris, come on, get back in," I said. Chris took a step backward, looking at the tracks. He said nothing, but I saw him mouth something I couldn't hear. He looked over his shoulder at me and his eyes were wide. He looked scared. I felt a jolt in my stomach. Chris wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Suddenly, the driver's side door handle rattled. I heard the metallic click of it trying to lift. My heart jumped. I twisted my head to the left. There, pressed against the window, was that hooded face, or at least the hood and some shadow beneath it. The figure had reappeared right next to my door, cheek against the glass. It was smiling. I saw teeth, dirty, uneven teeth. The hood made it hard to see the eyes. The face was inches from mine, separated by just the glass. I yelled out, "Danny!" I threw myself back in the seat, trying to get away. Danny shouted something I didn't catch. I could hear him scramble in his seat. The door handle rattled again. I felt the car shake slightly as the figure pulled on it. I locked all the doors. My fingers fumbled on the button. The figure kept pulling, slowly and firmly, no panic, just steady attempts to open it. I could see its fingers, thin, with dirty nails curling around the handle. The mouth kept that grin, lips chapped and cracked. I saw a dark smudge on the cheek, maybe dried mud. My chest tightened, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. Chris came running around the car. He reached the driver's side and stopped. He was a couple of feet away from that figure. I saw him hesitate. He raised his hand slightly, not sure what to do. The figure ignored him. It only cared about the door. Danny yelled, "Get away!" He rolled down his window an inch and shouted at the figure. That didn't do anything. I saw Chris reach out and grab the figure's arm. The figure jerked free with a quick, sharp movement and stepped back. The hood stayed low. I still couldn't see the eyes clearly. I took this chance and started the engine. The headlights flared brighter. The figure stood in the beam, not moving away but not coming closer either. I slammed the gas. The tires spun in the gravel. The figure stepped aside at the last second as the car lurched forward. Chris jumped back into the car, jerking the door shut. Danny cursed nonstop. I kept going, faster than was safe on that narrow road. As we sped off, I saw in the rearview mirror the figure standing in the middle of the road watching us. The hood still covered the face. The grin still seemed etched there. The figure didn't chase us. It just stood still, drifting backward into the darkness behind us. I noticed Chris panting. He had one hand pressed against the roof of the car like he was trying to steady himself. Danny was breathing through clenched teeth. I focused on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. After a few minutes, I spoke. I kept my voice low. "What the hell was that?" Danny turned and looked out the back window. Chris stayed quiet, staring straight ahead. We were moving fast, probably too fast. The trees blurred. I slowed down a bit. My heart still pounded and my stomach felt sour. Chris finally said, "I don't know what I saw. It was gone, then it circled around. The footprints went around the car." He paused, licking his lips. I saw them going all the way around, right behind us. Danny rubbed his face. "It was just some crazy person," he said, but he didn't sound sure. He sounded shaky, like he was just trying to calm himself. I didn't argue. I just kept driving, wanting to get off that road. We rode in silence for a long time. The sun was almost gone now, leaving everything in gloom. The headlights reached a few yards ahead, showing cracked pavement and the occasional patch of weeds. We passed no other cars. The road seemed longer than it looked on the map. My phone had no signal. Danny tried his phone, shook his head. Chris just kept quiet, one hand on the door handle, as if expecting the figure to appear again. We had been driving maybe another half hour when I slowed down at a bend. There was something lying in the middle of the road. It looked like a piece of torn fabric. I tapped the brakes. The headlights picked out muddy cloth. It looked a lot like the sleeve of a jacket. I swerved around it, not stopping. I looked in the mirror and saw the cloth disappear behind us. Chris said nothing. Danny breathed loudly. I wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I felt tense, like my muscles were too tight. My neck hurt from straining forward. A few minutes later, I noticed movement on the right side of the road. It was far into the trees, but I caught a glimpse. Something moved between the branches. Maybe it was an animal. I couldn't tell. I drove on, keeping my eyes forward. The road dipped and rose. The car's suspension creaked. The smell of damp leaves seeped through the vents. The engine noise was steady, but I felt every tiny vibration in the steering wheel. Suddenly, Danny yelled, "Shit!" He pointed at something ahead. I squinted. Up ahead on the left side, near a bend, was a figure, standing still by the roadside. Hooded, hunched, same posture as before. I slammed the brakes and jerked the wheel. The car skidded. Danny's hand shot out to brace himself. Chris leaned forward, gripping the seat. I managed to keep the car on the road. When we looked again, the figure was gone. I pressed the accelerator again, breathing hard. I felt my pulse hammering in my neck. I wanted to get out of there. I didn't care which direction as long as it led back to a main road. I tried to remember the map. I tried to guess how many miles we'd traveled. I kept driving, scanning the sides of the road, expecting that figure to appear at any moment. We reached a patch where the trees thinned out. There was a fence on one side, rusted wire, maybe marking an old property line. Ahead, the road turned sharply. I slowed down, not wanting to crash. The headlights swept across some bushes, revealing a gap in the fence. I saw a piece of cloth stuck on the wire. It looked the same dirty color as the figure's jacket. We crept around the corner. Danny tapped my shoulder and pointed at the dashboard clock. It was past 7 p.m. now. We had left the main road hours ago. The gas gauge was a little under half. I was aware of how alone we were out here. Chris cleared his throat and said, "Let's just keep going until we find a town. We gotta hit something eventually." I nodded and kept my mouth shut. My throat felt dry. I wanted to roll down the window but was afraid of letting in the night air. We saw no sign of the figure for a while. The road just went on. The tension inside the car felt heavy. Danny stopped trying the radio. Chris cracked his knuckles. I kept a tight grip on the wheel. My back ached and my legs felt cramped. We passed a broken-down mailbox leaning at an odd angle. It looked abandoned for years. Beyond that, nothing but more trees. Then we heard a sound. It came from the roof of the car. A light thump, like something tapped the metal. I froze and slowed down. Danny's eyes went wide. Chris leaned toward the back window and looked up, as if he could see through the roof. I eased my foot off the gas and we rolled slowly. The sound came again, 2 quick taps. It sounded like fingers or small stones. I couldn't explain it. I reached a hand toward the dome light switch, then stopped. I didn't want to turn on the light and lose my night vision. I just stared at the ceiling, breathing quietly, ears straining. We rolled forward for another few yards. Another tap came, softer this time, near the driver's side. Chris whispered, "Drive faster." I pressed the gas pedal. The car lurched forward. We picked up speed and the tapping stopped. I kept going, faster than before. The fence disappeared behind us, and we were surrounded by darkness again. My mind was racing. I tried not to imagine someone crouching on the roof holding on while we drove. That sounded impossible. After a few more minutes, we spotted headlights coming from the opposite direction. Relief washed through me. Another car, finally. I slowed down, wanting to flash my lights, maybe signal them. As the car approached, I noticed it was some old pickup truck. I couldn't see the driver well. We passed each other. I rolled down my window and shouted, "Hey, wait!" But the truck didn't stop. It just kept going. I considered turning around, but I didn't want to risk it. I had no idea what was behind us. We continued forward. A strange quiet settled in. No tapping, no figures, just a long, winding road. The leaves rustled outside, and occasionally a twig snapped under the tires. My stomach felt knotted. I wanted a drink of water, but I hadn't packed any. I asked Danny if he had anything to drink. He shook his head. Chris said nothing. We were all on edge. Then, without warning, the headlights caught a shape lying in the center of the road. This time it looked bigger than a piece of cloth. I slowed down, keeping my foot above the brake pedal, ready to stop. As we got closer, I realized it was a backpack. Old worn, straps torn. It lay open as if rummaged through. I steered around it. I didn't even think about stopping. I just kept going. I noticed Danny's breathing again. He was tense, fingers digging into his thighs. Chris reached over and locked his door again, even though it was already locked. We rolled on for another 15 minutes or so. Finally, we saw a cluster of lights ahead. Street lights, a crossroad. I gritted my teeth and pressed forward. As we got closer, I saw a stop sign and a larger road crossing ahead. No buildings, but a better road, with pavement lines and reflectors. I pushed the car forward until we reached that intersection. I turned onto the main road without hesitation. Once on the main road, I started to breathe normally again. Danny looked over his shoulder. Chris exhaled and leaned back in his seat. We drove for another mile, and then a gas station sign came into view. I pulled in under the fluorescent lights. The station was small, but it was lit. There were no other cars, but at least it felt safer than out there in the dark. I parked near a pump and turned off the engine. Inside the car, we sat for a moment, catching our breath. Nobody said much. I wiped sweat from my forehead. Danny tapped his phone. It had 1 bar of signal. Chris finally spoke, voice low. "We're not taking any more shortcuts." I just nodded. I felt my shoulders relax a bit in the bright light of the gas station sign. I opened my door and stepped out. The night air felt different here, less heavy. I stretched my legs, looking around. The road was quiet, but it wasn't isolated like before. No dark figures stood by the roadside. I could smell gasoline and asphalt. I leaned on the car and looked over at Danny and Chris. They got out too, each staying close to the vehicle, eyes scanning the darkness. None of us said what we'd seen was impossible. None of us tried to explain it away. We knew we'd been lucky to get out of that place. I didn't want to think too much about what the figure wanted or how it disappeared like that. I just wanted to fill up the tank and keep moving toward a place with more people, maybe find a motel, lock the door, and forget about it. We never mentioned it to anyone else. We left that road behind and never went back. I learned a lesson that night. Next time I'd stay on the main highway, no matter how bad the traffic got. It's better to sit in line with 100 brake lights in front of you than face something that shouldn't exist on a silent stretch of unknown asphalt. I don't know if the figure was just a disturbed person living out there or something else. It doesn't matter. We got away, and that's enough. I still remember that face pressed against the glass, those teeth, that grin. The image never left my mind. But we're safe, and that's all I care about now. I stood on the deck near the ship's railing and watched the water move under the dull light. The ship was small, old, and cheap. Most passengers were couples looking for a short trip. I was alone, trying to relax after a tough week at work. I chose a low-cost cruise because I didn't want to spend too much. I didn't expect luxury or excitement, just a quiet time. That night, I heard something strange, and it kept me awake. It was close to midnight when I first heard a muffled scream, like someone yelling behind a closed door. It came from somewhere down the corridor near my cabin, but when I opened my door to look, nothing seemed out of place. I walked through the corridor. The lights were dim. My footsteps were soft on the carpet. I passed by a particular door that caught my attention. It was an old wooden door, scuffed at the bottom. The number plate was missing a screw. I stepped in front of it and felt the floorboards creak under my weight. There was a sour smell in the air, like old damp towels. I leaned in and listened. I didn't hear anything else. I shook my head and returned to my cabin. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. In the morning, I saw a single wet footprint on the deck outside, leading from somewhere near the cabin door to the railing. I walked closer and looked at it. The print was shaped like a bare foot, water dripping at the edges. I touched the deck near it and felt cool moisture, but no puddle. The footprint led right to the railing, then nothing. I glanced over the side. There was only the ocean. I had no idea what it meant. I turned around and decided to talk to the crew. I approached a crew member wearing a faded polo shirt. He looked tired. I told him about the scream I heard. He smiled and said they had been having some hydraulic problems. He said pipes sometimes made strange noises at night. I mentioned the door where I smelled something sour. He shrugged and said some cabins were empty and needed maintenance. He didn't seem worried. He moved on to another part of the ship, not asking any questions. I tried another crew member. She listened, nodded, and said the same thing. Hydraulic issues, old pipes. The ship had these problems sometimes. She didn't seem interested either. I decided to check the corridor again. It was late morning and most passengers were eating breakfast. The corridor was empty. I walked past that same door. I stepped carefully. The floor creaked. The sour smell was still there. I leaned my ear against the door and listened. No voices, no sounds. Just a faint hum from somewhere deep inside the ship's structure. I tried the handle. It didn't move. It was locked. I checked the doors next to it. They had passengers' names on a small plate. This door had no nameplate, just a number, 14. I tried to remember if I had seen anyone enter or leave cabin 14. I hadn't. At lunch, I sat alone at a small table near a window. I watched people line up at the buffet. They were relaxed, eating fried fish and potatoes. I overheard some of them complaining about the cheap food. Others were happy just to have a break from their jobs. I kept thinking about the scream. It wasn't a random noise. I knew what I heard. It sounded human, and it sounded scared. The crew's explanation didn't convince me. Why would hydraulic pipes scream like that? Why would there be a locked cabin with a sour smell? After lunch, I walked around the ship. I checked the emergency maps posted near the stairs. Cabin 14 was listed, but it showed no assigned occupant. Most cabins had initials or something indicating who was staying inside. Cabin 14 was empty on the chart, just a blank space. I leaned in closer, looking for notes or marks. Nothing. I moved on to the reception desk. A young man stood behind it, staring at a computer screen. I asked him about cabin 14, said I was curious because I noticed it was locked. He said it was under maintenance. He repeated something about old plumbing. I asked if I could switch my cabin to 14. He shook his head and said it wasn't available. He looked bored, not nervous, just dismissive. I decided to stay up late that night and see if I could catch something strange again. After dinner, I went back to my cabin. I sat on my bed and listened to the low hum of the ship's engines. Outside my window, I could see faint lights on the water. I tried reading, but I couldn't concentrate. I got up, opened my door, and wandered down the corridor. It was quiet. Most people were in the bar or already sleeping. The corridor smelled stale, like old carpet. I approached cabin 14 and stood there. The floor creaked under my feet again. The smell of something sour hung in the air. I reached out and pressed my ear against the door. I breathed slowly. The door felt cool. I heard a faint scraping sound, like something dragging against the floor inside. Then it stopped. I whispered, "Hello?" No one answered. I waited for a while, listening. My heart was beating fast. My palms were sweaty. I felt a tension in my chest. I stepped back and moved a few steps away. I kept watching the door. Nothing happened. After several minutes, I started to feel stupid, like I was imagining things. I turned around to go back to my cabin. Halfway down the corridor, I heard a muffled sound again. It sounded like a short burst of panic cut off too soon. I spun around and hurried back to cabin 14. The corridor was empty. I knocked on the door. No response. I knocked harder. Still nothing. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. I tried pushing. Nothing. I placed my shoulder against the door and tried to force it, but it didn't budge. I stepped back, frustrated. I thought about calling out for help, but what would I say? I heard a noise behind a locked door. The crew would repeat the same excuse about pipes. Other passengers would think I was being paranoid. I decided to return to my cabin and wait. Maybe I could talk to someone in charge in the morning. I lay down on my bed feeling tense. I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that door, the locked handle, the sour smell. I pictured the single wet footprint on the deck. Where did it come from? Why only one footprint? The next morning, I woke early and went straight to the deck. I wanted to see if there were more footprints. The deck was clean, just some moisture from the night air. No footprints. The ship was quiet. I could hear the waves and some distant voices. I walked around until I found a man who looked like he was some kind of supervisor. He wore a cleaner uniform, but seemed older and more authoritative. I asked him about cabin 14. He looked at me, took a breath, and said it was off limits. He said there were issues with the plumbing and wiring, and that's why no one was inside. I asked about the strange smell. He shrugged, said old ships had odors. I asked about the scream. He shook his head and said sometimes passengers watched horror movies on their laptops. Sound traveled easily through the ship. I didn't believe him, but he didn't seem interested in talking. He picked up a mop and started cleaning a corner of the deck. I stood there for a moment, then walked away. I spent the afternoon watching the horizon. The sky was clear. I listened to other passengers talk about their evening plans. They wanted to drink, dance a little, maybe watch a show. No one mentioned screams, strange smells, or locked cabins. I felt alone in this. I had no proof that something was wrong, just my senses and that single footprint. That night, I tried a different approach. I waited until late again. I stood near the corridor's entrance and watched. If anyone entered or left cabin 14, I would see them. I stood there for an hour, leaning against the wall. My back started to hurt, and I shifted my weight. I noticed a slight flicker in the corridor's lights, like a power hiccup. I heard a distant clanging, maybe the ship's engine. Nothing else happened. No one came. No one left. I decided to try something bold. I walked straight up to the door of cabin 14 and tried the handle again. Still locked. I got down on my knees and looked at the gap under the door. The gap was small. I saw darkness inside. I placed my ear at the bottom. I smelled something stronger now, like stagnant water. It made me wrinkle my nose. I heard a faint dripping sound, water dripping onto something hard. Drip, drip, drip. I whispered, "Is anyone in there?" Silence. I got up and pressed my body against the door, pushing as hard as I could. The door didn't move. My shoulders started to ache. I stopped and looked down the corridor. No one was watching me. I thought about going to the reception and demanding that they open the door, but I knew they would refuse. They would say it wasn't my business. They would say I was causing trouble. I returned to my cabin. I lay down and kept my clothes on. I didn't trust the situation. I felt uneasy. I watched the clock on my phone. Near midnight, I heard that muffled scream again. This time it sounded a bit clearer. It lasted about 2 seconds. I jumped out of my bed and rushed into the corridor. My footsteps were loud in the quiet. I reached cabin 14 and heard nothing. I banged on the door with my fist. I shouted, "I heard you, open up." No one answered. I banged again. The sound echoed. I tried the handle, still locked. I felt sweat on my forehead. My heart was racing. I kicked the door, hurting my foot. I cursed under my breath. A crew member appeared at the far end of the corridor. He asked what I was doing. I told him I heard screaming in cabin 14 and that someone might need help. He walked toward me slowly. He looked calm, maybe too calm. He reached me and said there was no one inside cabin 14. He said I must have heard the pipes again. I insisted it sounded like a person. He shrugged and said I should relax. He asked me to return to my cabin. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at him. He didn't blink. He repeated that I should go back and not disturb the maintenance area. I realized I would get nowhere. I walked back to my cabin, angry and frustrated. I barely slept. When I got up and went outside at dawn, I found that wet footprint again. This time it was a little closer to the corridor's entrance. Just one footprint, no trail. I bent down and touched it. It was fresh and cold. I stood up and followed it to the railing. Just like before, it led there and vanished. I leaned over the railing. I saw only water. The sun was low and the horizon looked empty. I glanced back at the deck. Everything was normal except that single footprint. I turned toward the corridor. I decided to check cabin 14 one last time before we reached our port. I walked over. The corridor was empty and quiet. I stood in front of cabin 14 and tested the handle again. To my surprise, it turned. The door opened a crack, just an inch or two. I heard a slight rubbing noise inside, like a shoe sliding on the floor. I pushed gently. The door stopped at something. I tried pushing harder, but it wouldn't budge. I stuck my head in the small gap and looked inside. I saw a dark room with no lights on. I smelled that sour odor, stronger now. I saw a metal pipe protruding from the wall and dripping water onto the floor. The floor looked warped and damp. There was something on the floor blocking the door, maybe a small piece of furniture. I couldn't see clearly. I listened. but heard only the dripping water. No voices, no breathing, nothing else. I tried pushing the door again, but it wouldn't move. I pulled back and let the door close. The latch clicked, locked again. I hurried to find a crew member and tell him the door had opened. I found the older supervisor near the dining area. I said the door to cabin 14 had opened. He looked at me and asked if I tried to enter. I said yes. He said that was unsafe. He said the cabin was under repair and that passengers shouldn't enter maintenance areas. I said I saw dripping water. He nodded and said they knew about that. I said I smelled something sour. He said old ships had many odors. He didn't seem surprised or worried. I realized I would get no answers. I gave up asking. The rest of the day passed slowly. I avoided the corridor and spent most of my time on the deck watching the ocean. As we approached our final morning on board, I woke up early to check the deck again. There it was, another single wet footprint. I stood over it, feeling uneasy and tired. I knew I wouldn't find the truth. The crew would keep brushing it off. The passengers didn't care. There was no sign of violence or obvious crime. Just strange noises, a locked cabin, a sour smell, and one wet footprint that led nowhere. I looked over the railing at the empty horizon. I felt the breeze on my face. The ship would dock in a few hours. I would leave and never know what happened in cabin 14. I watched a crew member scrub the deck a few steps away, erasing the footprint. I said nothing. He said nothing. I stood there thinking about what I saw and heard and how everyone ignored it. I decided to pack my bag and wait in my cabin until we arrived. I didn't want to linger. There was nothing else I could do. The secrets would stay on this ship. I just wanted to go home. Go. We were too far from any trail and I knew it. I remember standing there looking around at nothing but trees and thick brush and feeling a kind of tension in my chest. There were no other people around, no signs, no markers, no campgrounds. We had walked for hours off the main path until we reached that spot. It was quiet. I could hear my own breathing and the light crunch of leaves under my boots. I wanted a remote place to camp. I wanted something different from the usual crowded spots. I got what I wanted and then I regretted it. I set up the tent as the daylight started to fade. My girlfriend Laura moved around near me and helped hold the poles in place. She was quiet, a little tired but still trying to stay positive. She wiped sweat from her forehead and handed me the mallet to drive the stakes deeper. I was focused on getting the tent solid. The ground felt uneven and I had to adjust the position a few times. The air smelled like damp soil and old leaves. I could taste the metallic flavor of my own sweat when I licked my dry lips. My shirt stuck to my back. There was nothing to hear except distant birds. I listened hard. A few soft owl hoots faded in and out. The silence between the hoots stretched longer than I liked. I tried to distract myself. I pulled the sleeping bags out of our packs and arranged them inside. I found my flashlight and tested it. The beam was strong. I showed it to Laura and she nodded. She pulled out a small propane stove and started heating water. She moved slowly, crouched down, trying to keep everything organized. We were both careful, talking quietly. Our voices felt too loud in the emptiness. When darkness came, it came fast. I shined the flashlight around. The tent was a small white shape in a circle of trees. The dirt around us looked ordinary enough, just scattered leaves and broken twigs. I tried not to imagine things. I kept telling myself that we were just out in the woods, nothing special. I forced myself to breathe evenly. My neck felt tense. My shoulders were stiff. We ate a simple meal, dehydrated food rehydrated on the stove. It tasted bland. I noticed Laura chewing slowly, not complaining, just doing what needed to be done. I tried some small talk. I mentioned how quiet it was. She just nodded. She kept turning her head to look around. I told her that we should focus on enjoying the isolation. She shrugged. She finished eating and started packing the garbage into a sealable bag. I felt uneasy, but I smiled at her. I said it would be fine. We were just not used to being so far away from everyone. It was probably around 10 at night when I first heard something different. We were already inside the tent. I had zipped us in and placed our boots just outside under the small awning. The lantern inside glowed weakly, casting a dull light on the nylon walls. Laura was lying on her side, reading a small map by flashlight. I was lying on my back, staring at the ceiling. Then I heard it. A heavy sound, not a footstep exactly, but more like a branch bending under weight. It was a kind of snap and rustle. I held my breath. Laura stopped flipping the pages of the map. I whispered, asking if she heard it. She said yes. I reached for my flashlight and turned it off. I wanted to hear better. We stayed quiet for a long time. I could feel my heartbeat. My ears felt sensitive. I heard leaves shifting outside, but not close. It sounded maybe 20 or 30 yards away. Something big moved slowly. I had no idea what it was. It didn't sound like a deer. It didn't sound like a bear either. But I wasn't sure. The air inside the tent grew warmer. I whispered again, suggesting we wait. Laura nodded. She touched my arm lightly. I felt a chill on my skin despite the stuffy tent. A few minutes passed. The sounds came and went. Sometimes I heard a faint crack, sometimes a soft thump. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing. A heavy, muffled breathing, not like a dog, not like a human panting, but something steady and deep. I tried shining my flashlight through the tent wall. The beams scattered uselessly, just showing me the fabric. I considered unzipping the tent, but I held back. I didn't want to startle whatever it was. I didn't know what it might do. Laura whispered that maybe it was a bear. I shrugged and said, maybe. She asked if we should make noise to scare it off. I couldn't decide. My mouth felt dry. I tried to swallow. I said, let's wait. We listened again. The sound faded. After a while, I heard only crickets and the distant owl again. I stayed awake for a long time, waiting for more noises. Laura drifted off, breathing softly. I rested on my elbow, holding the flashlight in my hand, pointed at the closed zipper. I kept thinking I heard something approach, but it was only the wind or my nerves. I must have slept at some point because I woke up feeling stiff and sweaty. My watch said it was near sunrise. Laura was still asleep, curled up. I rubbed my eyes and slowly got up. My back hurt. I unzipped the tent and stuck my head out. The morning light was weak and gray. The air smelled cleaner than at night. I looked around. The ground near the tent looked different. At first I couldn't tell what was wrong. I crawled out, stood up, and walked around the tent. The dirt around us had strange marks. I saw twisted branches stuck into the ground at odd angles. They weren't just fallen branches. They looked deliberately placed. They formed a rough circle around our tent. Some were thick and bent. Others were thinner but stuck deep. The soil looked fresh in spots, like something had dug into it. I could see claw marks or something similar. The leaves were disturbed everywhere. The pattern made no sense to me. It didn't look like natural windfall. It looked arranged. I called to Laura. She came out rubbing her arms. She saw what I saw. She asked me what it meant. I said I didn't know. I crouched down and touched one of the branches. It was moist, as if it had been pulled from the ground just now. I tried to pull it out. It was wedged in tight. I felt my heart pounding. I looked at Laura. She stood close to me, crossing her arms over her chest. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I walked around the tent, checking the other sides. Everywhere there were these branches arranged in a pattern. They seemed to form a perimeter about 10 feet from the tent. Inside this perimeter, the ground was stirred up. Outside it, the forest floor looked normal. I saw small piles of dirt that looked fresh, as if something with strong limbs had dug in and then covered them up. I noticed one spot where the leaves were flattened, as if a large body had crouched there. Laura asked if we should leave right away. I nodded. I said we should pack up and get out. She agreed. We moved fast. I collapsed the tent, shoving it into its bag without trying to fold it neatly. Laura grabbed the stove, fuel canisters, and our packs. We both worked without talking much. I kept looking around, shining my flashlight into the trees even though it was daylight. I didn't see anything, but I could feel my scalp prickling. We were not sure which direction to go. We had no trail near us. We had our compass and map, and we knew roughly how to get back. The hike would take hours. I shoved gear into my pack. I made sure we left no food scraps. I wanted no reason for any animal to follow us. Laura tightened the straps on her backpack and put on her boots. I stepped on a twisted branch and tried to break it. It wouldn't break easily. It was thick and wet. I gave up and moved on. As we started walking, I kept checking over my shoulder. The forest was still quiet. The sun was rising, but the light was weak under the canopy. I heard small animals moving in the brush. I tried not to think about it. I focused on putting distance between us and the campsite. We followed a rough bearing north, aiming to intersect with a known trail. The undergrowth was thick. We had to push through bushes and step over fallen logs. We didn't talk much. Every now and then, Laura asked if I heard something. Sometimes I thought I did, but I couldn't be sure. After a while, we stopped to catch our breath. I took a sip of water. My hands were shaking. Laura's face looked pale. She asked me again what I thought those branches meant. I shrugged and said I didn't know. Maybe an animal with strange habits, maybe something else. She pressed me for an answer. I told her I really didn't know. I tried to keep my voice calm. We moved again. We kept walking, checking the compass, avoiding thick clusters of bushes, stepping around thorny plants. The forest floor was uneven, with roots and rocks. I stumbled a few times. Laura slipped once and cut her palm on a sharp branch. She hissed in pain, but it was just a small cut. We kept going. The weight of the pack slowed us down. After maybe an hour, I started to feel like something was off. It was too quiet again. I stopped and listened. No birds, no small animal sounds, just our breathing. I looked around, turning slowly. The trees looked normal. I saw a lot of green and brown, nothing unusual, but I felt watched. I tried to ignore it. I told Laura to keep moving. We walked for another half hour. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My shoulders ached from the pack. My legs felt heavy. Laura kept looking over her shoulder. I tried to keep my eyes forward, but I couldn't help it. I turned around at least every few minutes. I never saw anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. We came to a small clearing. The sunlight was better there. I saw ferns and mossy logs. We paused for a moment, breathing hard. That was when I heard it again, the deep breathing sound. It came from behind a cluster of thick shrubs about 20 yards away. I froze. Laura grabbed my arm. I held a finger to my lips. We listened. The breathing sounded heavy, steady, like something large was inhaling and exhaling slowly. Then it stopped. I stared at the shrubs. I saw no movement. I whispered that we should keep going. Laura squeezed my arm harder. She whispered back, asking if we should run. I said no, not yet. I worried that running would trigger a chase. I told her to walk fast but steady. We left the clearing, entering denser woods again. The ground sloped downward. I tried to pick a path that was easier to follow. My boots slipped on damp leaves. I steadied myself on a tree trunk. The bark felt rough against my palms. We kept walking for another hour, maybe more. We were getting tired. We had no clear trail, and I worried we might have gone off course. I wanted to find a sign, any sign, of human activity. A marker, a fallen signpost, an old campsite, anything. But we saw nothing, just trees and shadows. At some point, Laura said she needed a break. We stopped next to a large rock. I told her to sit for a minute. I took off my pack and rubbed my neck. Then I heard a low rumble like a growl. It came from somewhere to our right, hidden by thick bushes and a fallen tree. I grabbed Laura's shoulder and told her to listen. She nodded and stayed quiet. The growl came again, low and muffled, like something warning us. I looked at Laura. She looked scared. Her face was tense, her eyes wide. I picked up a thick branch from the ground. It felt flimsy, but it was better than nothing. I motioned for Laura to put her pack on and be ready to move. She nodded and did it quickly, her hands shaking a bit. I took a deep breath. My throat felt tight. The growl stopped. I heard leaves rustling. It moved away or repositioned itself. I couldn't tell. I didn't smell anything strange, just the usual forest smells. I decided we had to keep moving. We couldn't stay there. I told Laura to walk behind me. We moved slowly at first, then a bit faster when we didn't hear the growl again. My legs felt rubbery. My chest felt tight. I kept swallowing, trying to keep my mouth moist. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. Eventually, we saw a break in the trees ahead. I recognized a slight rise in the terrain. If we got over it, we might see a landmark. We pushed through some thorny bushes. I scratched my hand. I kept the branch in my other hand. I held it raised, ready to swing, even though I didn't know what good it would do. We reached the top of the small rise and looked down. Through the trees, I saw a faint line of what looked like a trail. I couldn't be sure. It might have been a dried-up stream bed, but it looked worn, like something that people or animals used frequently. I told Laura we should aim for it. She nodded quickly. We descended carefully. The ground was loose in places. A few small rocks rolled under our boots. I kept scanning the trees, looking for any movement. The wind picked up slightly, making branches sway. I heard distant bird calls again. That made me feel a bit better. Maybe the presence of whatever had been following us was gone. Maybe it decided we weren't worth it. We reached what turned out to be a narrow trail, probably an old hunter's path or a game trail. It headed north, the direction we needed. I was relieved. We followed it, moving faster. We didn't talk much. I just kept going, one foot after the other, focusing on covering ground. Laura stayed close. Our packs rattled with each step. After a while, maybe another half hour, I stopped and listened again. No strange sounds. I heard birds, insects, the creaking of trees. Nothing heavy breathing, nothing growling. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I told Laura it was going to be okay. She nodded, still breathing hard. We drank some water and kept moving. We never saw what it was. We never got a clear look. I saw no fur, no shape, just signs. The breathing, the growling, the branches arranged around our tent, the fresh dirt, the sense of being watched. I thought about it as we continued to hike. I kept those thoughts simple. I just wanted to get out safely. I wanted to see a marked trail, a signpost, anything that meant civilization. We reached a known trail by late afternoon. I recognized a small wooden marker on a tree trunk. I pointed it out to Laura. She nodded, relieved. We followed the marked trail for a few miles until we got back to our car. The drive home was quiet. Neither of us wanted to talk about it. We just looked at the road ahead, the asphalt and the lines painted on it. We reached home late that night, both of us exhausted. Later, when I think about it, I only remember the raw details. The twisted branches, the heavy breathing beyond the flashlight's reach, the fresh soil, the circle around our tent, the feeling of being watched, the low, muffled growl as we were leaving. We were never attacked, never hurt beyond a small scratch, but I can't shake the tension I felt out there. It was like something tested us, watched us, made sure we understood that we didn't belong there. It never showed itself, never revealed its shape. It just waited, moved, and kept its distance. We left, and it stayed. I have no interest in going back there. I prefer marked trails now, campgrounds where I can see other people, where I can smell campfires and hear human voices. I don't care if it's less exciting. I want no part of whatever stayed hidden in those woods that night. If anyone asks, I just say we went camping off trail and decided it wasn't for us. I don't need to explain the rest. I'm glad we made it out, and I have no plans to push that luck again. I parked my rig at a rest area just off a narrow highway. The place looked cheap and mostly empty. There was one working light near the old fuel pump. It flickered, making the concrete pad and the nearby trash bins look darker than they were. I had been on the road for hours and I wanted to fill my tank and get back behind the wheel. This was my life most nights. Short stops, a bit of fuel, maybe a quick bathroom break, then back to it. Except this time, I noticed something off. There was a man standing several yards away. He was thin and holding his hands inside his coat pockets. He stayed still, facing me, as if waiting. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. I started pumping the diesel, keeping an eye on him. That was the beginning of a bad situation. Story in first person. I remember stepping down from the cab that night, my boots touching the cold asphalt. The night air smelled like old rubber and stale coffee. The pumps were old-fashioned, and I could feel the pump's handle rattling in my grip as the diesel flowed. I heard it running into the tank, a steady sound that usually calmed my nerves. Not that night. My eyes kept drifting to that man standing a short distance away. His jacket looked too big for him, and I could see the outline of something stiff pressing against the fabric. I tried not to stare. I fixed my eyes on the pump's display, counting gallons, checking the total. But I still noticed him moving closer, inch by inch, slow steps. I could hear his boots scraping the pavement. I tried not to panic. I wanted to finish fueling and leave. I told myself he might just be looking for a ride. That happens sometimes. People see a truck and think they can hitch a quick ride to the next town. I never liked giving rides to strangers, though. Company policy said no riders without permission. I also had my own rule to never pick up anyone I didn't know. There were too many stories out there about trouble on the road. I kept these thoughts simple. I wanted to keep the situation calm. He reached a point where he was close enough to talk. He raised his chin, his voice low and scratchy. He asked if I was heading to the next town, said he needed a ride, said it was important. I remember that he didn't ask nicely. He kind of pushed the words out, expecting a yes. I told him I was sorry, that I don't take riders. I said I couldn't help him. I tried to keep my voice calm and firm. I didn't want to challenge him, but I also didn't want to sound weak. He didn't take it well. His eyes were hard to see in that dim light, but I got the impression that he was annoyed. He smiled, but not in a friendly way. It was a slow, uneven smile. He moved closer, maybe a foot or so nearer than before, and he kept one hand inside his coat, gripping something. I watched that hand. I noticed how stiff his arm was. I didn't see a gun or a knife, but I felt certain he had something there. The back of my neck felt warm and my heartbeat picked up. I could feel sweat under my shirt, and it was a cool night. I tried to keep my voice level. I said I was sorry, repeating it, that I had to stick to my rules. He said I should make an exception. He said it in a flat tone, like a warning. I saw his shoulders tighten. The pump clicked off, and for a second I thought about just pulling the nozzle out and leaving it on the ground. But I didn't want to make any sudden moves. I slowly removed the nozzle, hooked it back in place, and closed my fuel cap. He stood too close, and my heart was pounding. My truck was a step away. I turned slightly, showing him I was ready to go. I said something like, "I have to move on." He hissed a quiet laugh. I didn't like that sound. I made my way around the front of the truck. He followed. His boots sounded uneven, one heel hitting harder than the other. I could see his breath in the air. I told him again, "No ride." This time my voice sounded more blunt. He looked at me, reached inside his coat again. I gripped my door handle. I was ready to jump in and lock it. I had the keys in my front pocket. My hand was shaking a bit. I felt my throat dry up. He was looking at me like he was sizing me up. I didn't see anyone else around. The rest area was empty. The faint hum of some electrical box near the pump filled the silence. I heard distant traffic on the highway, but too far to help me. I said, "Sorry," one last time, and I pulled the door open fast. I hauled myself up inside, slammed the door, and locked it. I leaned over and locked the passenger door. Then I started the engine. The sound of the engine calmed me a little. I felt safer behind the wheel, doors locked. I looked through the windshield. The man stood there, not moving. He had that thin frame and that stiff pose. He backed away a few steps, then stopped. I eased the truck into gear and pulled forward slowly. I used the side mirror to watch him. That's when I saw his face under that flickering light. His eyes looked pale, almost white, but maybe it was just the bad lighting. He didn't wave. He didn't yell. He just stood there, arms at his sides now. As I guided the truck back onto the highway, I kept checking my mirrors. My hands gripped the wheel so hard that my knuckles felt stiff. The highway ahead was dark and mostly empty. I tried to focus on driving steady and not speeding. I told myself he was just some unstable guy looking for a ride. He didn't try to break in. He didn't jump me. Maybe I was safe now. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might follow me somehow. After about 5 minutes, I saw headlights coming up behind me. The road was straight, and I saw just one pair of headlights. They weren't close enough to identify the vehicle yet. I tried to stay calm. Traffic was normal, even late at night. Maybe it was just another driver heading the same direction, but I kept looking in my mirrors more often than I should. The headlights got closer, and I could make out a small car. I tried to see details, but it was too dark. My trailer rattled a bit over some rough patches in the road. I checked the speedometer. I was at a steady speed. The car behind me matched my speed for a while, then closed the gap slowly. My pulse kicked up again. I thought about pulling off at the next stop, maybe one with more lights or more people. But the next rest area wasn't for another 30 miles or so. I didn't have many options. The highway was 2 lanes, one in each direction. The car stayed behind me, never passing. Sometimes cars do that, but this felt off. It drifted from one side of the lane to the other like someone was trying to see the side of my trailer. I pressed my lips together, feeling sweat on my forehead. My shirt stuck to my back. My eyes kept darting between the road ahead and the mirror. I decided to speed up a little. I eased the truck forward. The engine growled. I noticed the car falling back for a moment. Then it sped up too. It stayed behind me, maybe 2 car lengths off. I could see its hood now in my mirror. It looked like an older sedan. I remembered the man's thin frame and that twisted smile. I couldn't prove it was him, but I felt sure it was. I checked my phone. I had it in a cradle by the dashboard. The signal was weak. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have a strong signal. Still, I tried. The call didn't go through. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, cursing under my breath. I considered what to do next. I had a full tank of fuel. The car behind me probably had less range. If I kept going, maybe he'd give up. I tried to stay calm. I listened to the engine's steady rumble. I reached for the bottle of water near the seat and took a sip. My throat felt scratchy. I needed to stay alert. I tried not to drift over the center line. The darkness outside pressed in. The truck's headlights lit the road, showing the white lines and the occasional reflector on the side. No cars coming in the opposite direction. No trucks passing me. Just me and that car behind me. After some miles, I saw a sign for roadwork ahead. The sign warned of a single-lane situation, possibly a flagger or reduced speed. I cursed again. Slowing down could give him a chance to catch up or do something worse. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The air inside my cab felt stale. I rolled down the window a few inches. I tasted the night air, dry and cold. The road narrowed and I saw orange cones. The speed limit dropped. I had to slow down. My trailer bounced a bit over some uneven pavement. The car behind me slowed down too, staying close. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. There was a stretch of about 100 yards where the lane was very narrow due to construction barriers. I kept a steady pace. My shoulders ached from tension. I moved through the zone, praying the car wouldn't pull some stunt. But it didn't. It just followed. Once we cleared the construction, the road opened up again. I accelerated, going a bit over the limit. The car stayed with me. My mind raced with possible options. I had a CB radio, but that wouldn't call the cops. I tried the phone again. Still no signal. I smacked the steering wheel with my hand, frustrated. My chest felt tight. I decided to try something else. I tapped the brakes lightly a few times, flashing my brake lights. Sometimes that tells a tailgater to back off. But the car didn't back off. It moved even closer, close enough that I could almost see the shape of a person inside, though I couldn't make out a face. My neck felt stiff. I knew I had to keep going until I found a better lit area, or maybe a truck stop. I checked my GPS. The next decent truck stop was about 20 miles ahead. That felt like a long time. I had no choice. I kept driving. A few minutes later, I saw headlights coming the other way. A big rig passed me going east. I wished I could blink my lights and get him to stop, but that wouldn't help. I focused on the road. The car behind me swerved once toward the center line, then back. My mouth went dry again. I thought maybe he would try to force me off the road, but he didn't. He just kept following. I saw another sign. A bigger town was coming up in about 15 miles. The truck stop I remembered was near that town. If I could just reach the outskirts, maybe there would be more traffic or even a police cruiser. I forced myself to breathe steady. My palms were damp on the wheel. I rubbed one hand on my pants leg. I tasted bitterness in my mouth. I told myself to just keep going, to not stop on the side of the road. That would be stupid. I needed a place with people and lights. The minutes ticked by slowly. The car stayed behind me. I tried not to look too often, but I couldn't help it. Each glance in the mirror made my stomach knot up. My shoulders felt tight. My head hurt a little from the strain. The truck's seat creaked under my shifting weight. Finally, I saw the glow of lights on the horizon. Nothing big, just a faint yellow glow that meant more civilization. My speed was steady, a bit above the limit. The car matched it. As I got closer, I saw signs for a hotel, a gas station, and a truck stop. I knew the truck stop. I had been there before. It had a diner, bright lights, and often a couple of other drivers parked. It might have security cameras too. I set my sights on that place. If he followed me in there, at least I wouldn't be alone. I reached the turnoff for the truck stop. It was just off the main highway, about half a mile down a side road. I slowed and signaled. The car behind me slowed too. I turned onto the side road. It was narrower and lined with trees on one side. My heart thumped harder. If he was going to make a move, now would be the time. I tapped my brakes again, reducing speed. The truck stop's lights were visible ahead. They were bright and steady. I could make out a few parked trucks and maybe a couple of cars. Good. Witnesses, maybe other drivers to back me up. I pulled into the lot slowly, swinging wide so I could park near the main building. The asphalt here was clean and bright under overhead lights. I saw a couple of guys walking toward a door, maybe truckers heading for a late meal. I picked a spot near them. I checked my mirror. The car had stopped at the entrance to the lot, not pulling in completely. It sat there for a moment, headlights glaring toward me. I watched it from my mirror. My heart still pounded. The engine of my truck idled, steady and normal. I waited to see what he would do. He stayed there for maybe 15 seconds. Then he backed up and turned around, heading back toward the highway. I could see his taillights fading as he drove off. I exhaled slowly. My shoulders slumped. I rubbed my face with my hand. My skin felt clammy. I turned off the engine and sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. I looked around the lot. I saw a couple of other truckers by their rigs, a cashier smoking by the door, and the bright interior lights of the diner. Everything here looked normal, safe. I got out of the cab, locked it, and walked toward the building. My legs felt shaky. I could still feel the tension in my chest and arms. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting that car to pop up again, but there were no cars pulling in. The highway in the distance looked calm and empty. I listened carefully. Just the hum of the truck stop's sign, the distant sound of engines idling, and muffled voices from inside. My breathing returned to normal, little by little. My mouth was still dry, so I went inside to buy a soda or something cold. I passed the cashier, gave a small nod. He nodded back, casual and uninterested. I was grateful that nothing else happened, that the strange man and his car were gone. Inside the diner, the smell of fried food and coffee pushed away the memory of diesel and tension. I sat on a stool at the counter. A waitress came over and asked what I wanted. I ordered a soda and drank it slowly. The cold liquid felt good. I sat there for a while, listening to the quiet chatter of a few people. I glanced at the window occasionally, making sure I didn't see that old sedan outside. It never showed up. After a while, I started to feel a bit more normal. My shoulders loosened, and my headache faded. My clothes still felt damp against my skin, and I wiped my face with a napkin. I decided I'd wait here until I felt confident the man wouldn't return. I had lost maybe an hour of drive time, but I didn't care. I would rather stay somewhere with lights and people than risk running into that man again on some deserted stretch of road. The waitress refilled my soda. I just nodded and took another sip. Outside, I saw another truck pull in. Two men stepped out and started talking. Everything was ordinary out there. I wondered what would have happened if I had let him in my truck. I didn't need to imagine too much. The tension in his stance, the way he kept his hand inside his coat, it all suggested he was trouble. I made the right call. My heart rate had slowed to normal, but I still felt a slight tremor in my hands. I set them flat on the counter and focused on breathing steady. After finishing my drink, I decided to step outside again and check my rig. I walked around it, looking for any signs of tampering. Everything looked fine. The trailer's seals were intact. The tires looked normal. The fuel cap was secure. I stood by the driver's door, scanning the lot one more time. A few more trucks had arrived. A couple of drivers stood by their trailers talking about something. A small car pulled in, but it wasn't the same car. It was a newer model, with a couple inside. They parked and went into the store. I relaxed more. I climbed back into my cab and locked the door behind me. I turned on the interior light and sat in the driver's seat. I rolled my neck to ease the stiffness. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? A strange man followed me? I didn't have a plate number. I didn't have much to go on. He didn't actually attack me or damage my property. All I had was a bad feeling and a tense hour on the road. I decided to let it go. I would just remember this night and stay careful. Maybe I could at least warn other drivers on the CB if I ever passed that rest area again. For now, it was late, and I needed to keep moving eventually. But first, I would rest. I had a sleeper bunk behind me, and a few hours off the road might help settle my nerves. I left the cab light on for a few minutes while I prepared my bedding. The inside of the truck felt safe again. No strange noises, no headlights in the mirror, no pale eyes staring at me. Just the normal hum of a parked truck and the distant murmur of the truck stop. I turned off the light and lay down, my head on the pillow, my ears open for any unusual sounds outside. I heard only the steady background noise of engines and distant conversations. My breathing evened out. I stayed awake a while, just to be sure, but eventually my eyes grew heavy. I stayed alert but also felt the exhaustion of the long drive. After some time, I dozed off, feeling relieved that the night was quiet and safe now.